Hi, this is John from the Red Dice Diaries, and in this video we're happy to be joined by Jacob Possin and Ryan Danks, the creators of the fantastic Jadepunk RPG and members of Reroll Productions. And we're going to be discussing various things about the future plans for Reroll Productions and upcoming things in Jadepunk, as well as having a bit of a general chat about their RPG history. So first of all, Jacob, if you'd like to introduce yourself and give us a brief idea about your history with role-playing.
All right. I'm Jacob Possin. I work for Ryan. My history of role-playing games is, geez, I don't know, it goes back 20-ish years, and I've been writing them on my own forever. My first game I ever designed was called the Army Guy game because I got really fed up with the exorbitant prices of Games Workshop minis games. So I built a minis combat game for the little army guys you can buy for like $100 for $1. So I did that when I was 15, and I don't think I've ever really stopped.
Okay, thanks very much. And how about yourself, Ryan?
I got into gaming about the same time, about 20 years ago or so. I was played Dungeons and Dragons. A friend of mine, he decided to, his dad wrote it, or his dad, I guess it was his dad, I don't know. But he ran it for us first time. I had fun, and then I just decided to start running my own games. The first game I ever bought was Heroes Unlimited, the old Palladium one, and I got into superhero gaming mostly. I also played a lot of World of Darkness for a very long time. And then went back and forth. Mutants and Masterminds I probably played more of that than anything else for about 10 years, all three editions. And then discovered Fate, got involved in that. And about 2 or 3 years ago is when I decided I want to start writing games. I was mostly into fiction, wanting to write fiction and stuff, but I decided, yeah, okay, I'll write games. And I mostly as a concept of I want to make games about my fictions, about my stories that I'm writing. I want to have a game to represent the world, and that was the initial concept I got involved in it. And then I started writing in Fate because I really liked Fate, and it came out, and they have a really good policy on copying their stuff, copy paste, so that kind of thing. So I just got involved in it like that, and I've been everything for me is kind of informed by gaming, so it's a huge part of my life.
Okay, great stuff. And now obviously talking about Reroll Productions, I mainly know of Reroll Productions through your excellent Fate-based RPG, Jadepunk. We'll go on to talking about that very shortly. But for fans of your work, are there any other games out there that you guys have worked on individually prior to this? Obviously, Jacob mentioned creating a sort of an early sort of skirmish war game. Are there any other products that you guys have worked on before this that fans of your work might be able to look up and find out there?
Do you want to go first?
I've only written one other thing, and it's on my website, free to download. I'm going to put it together in a nicer package and put it on DTRPG as a pay what you want. But it's Ready Fight, and it's about like a side-scrolling fighting games, try to mimic Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter and stuff like that, but in a tournament style that makes it fun even for the people who aren't in the match at the moment. Gives them something to do. But that's all that I really wrote, other than a lot of mods for a lot of games. I know Jake's done a lot more on the custom level.
Yeah, actually, one of my biggest regrets in life is that I lost my original document for the Army Guy game, which is really annoying because I did 2 years worth of playtesting, and it was actually pretty, or at least from what I remember, it was pretty great. It might just be nostalgia talking there. I did a couple of game chefs that I think are still available out there. There's Whispers in the Dark, which is a kind of pass the stick story type game where you make somebody live a very boring kind of terrible life. Never write while you're depressed. And then I also wrote Hollow Realm, which is kind of my take on superheroes meets Madoka Magica, if you've watched that anime. So it's got a lot of the ideas of Grant Morrison-esque superheroes mixed with a lot of the visual ideas of what happened in Madoka. So it's a magical girls game, even though it doesn't really look like one. And then I did Criterion City, which I'm working on a 4th or 5th version of right now because I'm not happy with how it turned out. But the world is really interesting, and it's basically Jason Bourne meets Big O. So again, I'm very interested in kind of the idea of heroism and fighting against badness and standing up for stuff. I don't like the idea of powerlessness in a game. I get some people enjoy that. I just never really have. And so all of my games tend to be about taking power and what that means, and responsibility versus consequences and that sort of thing.
I mean, that's certainly one of the things that originally drew me to the Fate RPG system, is that you start off as characters that are fairly sort of skilled or fairly sort of proficient in whatever area your character is, rather than, as you say, in sort of starting off as a powerless nobody and then having to sort of crawl over sort of broken glass before you actually get any decent abilities or ability to affect the story. But in terms of general role-playing then, guys, when you guys are actually playing, obviously you mentioned it a bit there, Jacob, what is it that you guys look for in a role-playing game system and setting? If someone sat you down and said, what are the one sort of must-have for a role-playing system and a setting? Jacob, what would you go for in your ideal setting?
Well, it comes down to kind of 3 questions, I guess. Can it do Dune? Can it do Star Wars? And can it do Tolkien? And if it can do all 3 of those, then it's a perfect game system. I've never met one that can do it. Fate is pretty close. Fate is the closest I've come, because what really kind of drives me is the idea. Like, I love action. I absolutely adore action. I'm kind of a connoisseur. I own something like 1,500 movies, and over half of them are action movies. But the thing that makes action wonderful is the personalities in it. Like, you watch the original Star Wars, specifically Empire Strikes Back, and the fight between Vader and Luke is a conversation. They're having a discussion about their morality and about what they believe and about their worldviews, and those things are clashing. And so when I look for a game, I look for a game that can do that can make a fight into a conversation. I look for something that can make social conflict into something more, like Paul Atreides does, where social conflict is just the surface level, and then below that there can be other things. There don't have to be, but there can be. And so I kind of look for layers within the mechanics and within the ability to make a setting, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the idea about these conflicts being, like you say, almost a confrontation and a conversation in one. Because obviously one of the sort of things that stood out for me in the Jadepunk game was the duel system, where you're having that back and forth in that conflict, rather than it just being the more sort of general, actual sort of conflict that you might get in an RPG where it's just one rolling a dice. It's that back and forth between like the two sort of single combatants.
Well, and the funny story about that with Ryan and I is that the duel system kind of came out of him and I both disagreeing with each other on how it should go. I wanted it to go more simple. He wanted it more complex. I saw where he was coming from. He saw where I was coming from. And eventually we realized we could just do it with this simple tweak of the system. And we were like, oh, well, this is way better. So peace in our time, I guess.
That's it. It's all part of the collaborative process. Okay, so Ryan, if you were to pick a couple of characteristics that will be in your ideal system and setting, what would you say is really important to you when it comes down to it in an RPG?
Well, I think Jake hit it. The first thing I did when I got a hold of Fate Core, was I hacked it with Star Wars. And it's on my website, the whole document, the Fate Core Star Wars hack, which I need to update. But the idea for me is if you can do Star Wars, you can do anything. Star Wars has to have melee combat, has to have range combat, vehicles, superpowers. If you can mimic Star Wars, you can mimic anything. And so I take that, and for me, everything's superhero. Ideally, every single game I ever play is superhero. For me. It never happens that way, but that's my ideal. And I'm a huge fan of Star Wars. So like Mutants and Masterminds, for me, if you could have Mutants and Masterminds, which is capable of pretty much anything, but it's kind of higher level with the way certain things work. Take that and make it simple so it doesn't take you an hour and a half to make a character. That is where that's kind of the perfect thing for me. But also playing in Fate for so many years now. Well, so many years, 2.5. I've learned that I've really learned to enjoy the story elements, and that the story elements is not just something that GM reads to you. It's a creative, collaborative process of telling the story. And so I've really learned from Jake as a GM in that I don't create adventures anymore at all. All I do is I have a story hook or a plot hook, and then I just say, okay, where are we going? And I let the players tell me that. They're going to help tell me that they're going to help tell the story. They're going to drive the action. And so I'm just at that point responding to what they want. And for me, I can't do that with something like D&D 5th edition or Mutants and Masterminds, because if they go and they all of a sudden require some minions or some bad guys or something that I'm not prepared with, I don't have half an hour to sit down and create that. So that's actually why the Jadepunk system has the scene fractals and has the faces that we have, where you can make everything you need in a scene in 30 seconds because of that new take on how to GM and help that collaborative storytelling. I don't believe in GM prep other than I have an idea that this is a main villain. Somehow we're going to get to him, but here's the plot hook. Now, how's this going to go? And like I mentioned it in the Jadepunk game I ran yesterday that's on my YouTube channel, I just created the plot hook, and then I knew kind of what I wanted to do, but they created the vehicle for doing that. And I mentioned it in there of how much I planned, how much I didn't. And I was able to, in that instance, I just flipped to the book because we already had the guardsman written up. But I'm able to just go look at it. So for me, it's a long answer to a really supposedly simple question. But for me, it's got to have enough crunch that I can represent any character. But at the same time, the GM side of it needs almost zero crunch, so that way they can create on the fly, and it has to be able to represent the shared storytelling experience that I don't think tactical systems do. I think they're great for minis campaigns, but I don't believe a tactical system like typical traditional D&D. D&D 5th edition does a little bit better at it, but not quite there yet. But tactical systems, I don't believe, allow you to tell the story in a collaborative, shared storytelling experience the way that I enjoy. I know it's possible, but the way I enjoy it, I don't think it's possible.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot recently, because I've had a couple of friends who aren't as sort of experienced in playing different RPGs, is how to basically get a game across to someone with the minimum of fuss. Because I certainly remember when I was younger, someone said, "Oh, do you want to join in this game with us?" And then you say, "Oh, great. Well, how does it go?" And they hand you some like giant rule book and say, "Wow, just read that like mighty tome of rules I've put there, and then you'll have everything you need to know." And sort of leafing through the first 50 pages and going, "Oh, I don't really understand any of this. How much of this do I actually need to read?" I mean, it's why I'm quite a fan of the sort of the digest size books that a lot of the Fate systems go in for, because there's an awful lot that can be done without unnecessarily sort of complicating it. And if you can create a character that reflects everything you want in the space of about 5-10 minutes, do you really gain much extra from just adding a load more stats and taking like an extra hour or two to do it?
Right. Yeah, and one of the things, that's exactly the reason we put, and I completely stole the idea from the Eberron setting of D&D, but they have, in Eberron it's 10 things you need to know. In Jadepunk it's 5. And the idea was, if you have a new player and you don't have a lot of time, They came in, you're about to start the game, and they're like, hey, okay, well, we'll create a character real quick. It'll take about 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. But what's the setting like? Well, here you go. The 5 things you need to know. Read that page, half a page. It's a little sidebar. And you're good. You know the basics of the setting, where everything else you'll just discover and play, but you know enough to create a compelling character off of that. And that was, again, I'm always about zero prep. I want to, hey, guys, you want to play a game? Awesome. What do you want to play? And in the time you could set up a board game, you should be able to be ready to play an RPG, in my opinion.
Well, actually, yeah, that was kind of Ryan and I's goal right from the start. Outside of setting goals, our mechanics and everything goal was just to be like, can you play this game in 10 minutes? Because if you can't play this game in 10 minutes, if you can't sell this game in 10 minutes, you've lost. Because just the way both he and I play, we really like to not have to think that far ahead. It's like he's got kids, I've got 3 jobs. Both of us are way too busy to sit down and say, well, I guess we could spend 4 hours learning how to do this, or we could do it in 10 minutes and we could get 4 hours of play. And I think at the end of the day, we enjoy the kind of the force of play, I guess.
Right.
Yeah, I very much agree.
Yeah, I think it's important to note though that character creation usually takes longer than 10 minutes. But that's because you're going back and forth.
First time, yeah.
Yeah, the first time. After that, once you get going, especially if you're like me, I learn a new system and then I start creating all these superheroes in it. And then by the time I know that, I've got it down where I can write a character pretty quick in almost any system. And in this especially.
I'm going to turn about you guys when it comes to people who are maybe not as used to the sort of the fate-based system. But one of the things I've found that people do tend to have trouble with sometimes is the actual coming up with aspects for their characters. I've not had so much of a problem with Jadepunk because you guys provided some very sort of clear guidelines on right, this aspect is the incident that sort of led to you rebelling against this corrupt society. This is your portrayal aspect, a sort of summarization of your character in a sentence. Whereas I know certainly some of the other sort of fate-based games, if you just sort of give it to someone and say, oh, you've got to come up with 5 story tags or 5 aspects, a lot of people will sort of, in my experience, sort of look at it blankly and go, oh, well, I'm not really sure what would be a good aspect.
I've run into that a lot. I never really got it because aspects, they were the part of the system that clicked with me immediately. So I was just like, oh, I can do this all day long. This is my favorite thing. And so I just did. I guess it's because I have like just random pithy half sentences floating around in my head, which is weird to say out loud. But it's just like I look at stuff, and I mean I'm a writer, and Ryan I'm sure has the similar things where you've got like half an idea in your head, and you're like, well that's clever. I'm gonna save that for later for something, and then so I've got reams and reams of just weird sounding stuff that's great for characters or great for setting or whatever, because it's just like just read a lot, look around, think about stuff as words, and I think that's what really drew me to Fate was the idea that you could turn everything into words, like because I mean at the end of the day we're all just sitting around a table talking at each other, and so a lot of times in other games I've been playing you'd be trying to gesture and trying to figure out, okay, well, he's like 37 feet away. That's like 2 room lengths. You can figure that, and everybody's trying to imagine it, and it just doesn't work. We're just like, you throw down a sentence like, too far away to reach. Boom. All right. Good. that's
Yeah, I'm actually more of your standard player. I had a hard time coming up with aspects. But mostly for me, it's because of the indecision. I have an unlimited amount of decisions in that phase trio. So it's like, okay, well, I wrote this story, and that helps me come up with an aspect. But if we're playing in a specific setting, that setting should inform kind of the story that's being told. Right? And so why not have a little bit more cue into what this should be? I understand a lot of the draw to bring the party together before the start of the game, because then you avoid that tavern scene that everyone hates. But you know, if
I
for
love
me,
the tavern scene. I'm not going to lie. I do. I use it all the time. I think it works fine. I think it is cliche, but I think as GMs, our medium is cliche. We play with cliche and stereotype. We deal with things that they're most superficial. And I think if we learn to play with the cliche, I think that all meet at the tavern is a very fun way to do it.
I mean, how cliched are we talking? Are we talking just a normal tavern scene, or are we talking like full-blown guy sort of staggering into the tavern with a knife in his back and a note clasped in his hand and sort of collapsing across the table?
Well, if you read the adventure that we did for the Kickstarter, I don't know if you were part of the Kickstarter process.
I wasn't. I unfortunately missed the Kickstarter.
Well, well, in our adventure, we start off in them crashing their ship into a tavern. So, I mean, it's a tea house, but it's a tavern. And yeah, I kind of put it in there because one, it's a neat setting that works real well for a fight scene, and two, it's a great intro. It's a classic. I think it can be overused, but like anything else, it's how you use it, not the item itself. Sorry to go on a tangent. That's
absolutely fine. I do think you're right. I mean, I think the reason that these scenes become cliched and overused is obviously they have a certain draw or a certain power to them that leads to people using them an awful lot. I think if they didn't, then they wouldn't get used and we just wouldn't be bothered about them. But,
well, it's also a major Tolkien thing, which is where fantasy gets it from. You know, they're always meeting in a tavern, and like every single movie, it all starts in a tavern almost. Or at least at the beginning of every story.
So
we've talked a little bit about what you guys like to see in games. What sort of do you guys play in many games? Obviously, we know that you guys are very busy. Do you actually get much time to actually play in games currently? And if so, what games are you playing at the minute?
Well, I'm currently running a game of Atomic Robo, set in the near-distant future. I call it Fractured Soul. Basically, it's a crazy science fiction opera superhero mashup. It's fun. We're having a lot of blast with it, but yeah, it's hard to get together. Everybody's got busy lives, so we get together every 2.5, 3 weeks, whenever we have time, and play. But everybody seems really stoked about it. So, and then I haven't played in a little while, but I'm running a Wild Talents campaign as well, which I really dig. Just kind of modern day superheroes. Everybody just suddenly gets powers for some reason, and kind of open sandbox kind of a deal.
Oh, excellent. So how about yourself, Ryan?
No. I don't play very much because, you get busy. And then also that concept of you're a game designer, you must just play games all day. No, it's not true. And actually, because I just started my very first game of Jadepunk ever. I played a little bit in the playtest, but it was mostly Jake running playtest. I just started mine. Yesterday was the very first session outside of character creation that I've ever played, and I dug it. I was like, oh, you guys got to go? No, let's stay. But I did resolve in 2015 I'm going to play more games. The group that I had throughout 2014, the face-to-face group, kind of dissolved, and they're talking about getting back together, but D&D 5th edition is not really my thing. I'm not into tactical play. So I did have a D&D group from mostly Fate Core fans, Jadepunk fans and stuff, and Benjamin Feehan, who writes for us, he was in it, and we were meeting Saturday nights, but yesterday we kind of decided, we haven't met since the first session that happened in November, so let's just dissolve that. So we're going to start Star Wars. We don't know what system we've got. We've mostly been working on, what the setting is going to be like, but we're going to do that on Fridays. And I'm trying to get something. I would really like to have 3 or 4 games during the week. My wife wants to play. I've got a board game group on Monday mornings we're getting started on. because I do want to play more games, because I notice my writing and my game design writing, like all around, just overall, my creativity just gets so stale and just boring and droll if I'm not having this creative outlet that I enjoy, and it doesn't feel like, hey, I'm just playing. This is work. This is actually fun.
Muscles. You gotta exercise those GM muscles so you can learn how to be creative all the time.
Yeah, and one of the things we're playing with the new, we did it with the D&D, but it's a new Star Wars game, is the idea, it's in the D&D, the new Dungeon Master's Guide, the plot point system, where at any moment someone can drop a plot point and take over as GM. And that way everyone has a player, and at any moment it's like, well, okay, you guys went off on a tangent, let me see if I can figure something out. Someone just goes, oh, no, I got an idea, plot point, I'm the GM, and they go with their idea. And we haven't played with it too much to try that out. What we're kind of doing is just making it a rotating GM schedule. But that idea, that concept, I love that idea, and getting it. That's like true shared storytelling. So I would like to play more supers and other games that are more just real narrative stuff. But yeah, I mean, for now I'm in this process of the January starting the 2015 gaming and really trying to get 2015 to be about gaming.
Now, one of the things that's come up recently when I've been talking to people on about various sort of YouTube videos that they've created to do with RPGs is that there's an awful lot of RPG content out there that's giving advice to GMs and storytellers, but there's not quite as much content aimed at players. And there was a discussion about whether that's because the people who tend to create YouTube videos tend to be people who tend to do the sort of GMing more, they're sort of more comfortable talking in front of an audience, etc. I know for myself, I tend to GM probably more games than I actually play in. So I was wondering whether that was the case for you guys. Do you tend to be more of a GM, or do you tend to be more of a player?
I have played in exactly 5 games in my entire life. I have run hundreds. So percentage-wise, I've never played. But no, I find it interesting because I used to make that same kind of observation that most of the advice is GM advice and not player advice. And I was like, why is that? Because a lot of the problems are player-oriented problems. In the sense of, like, how do you deal with a problem player? It's like, well, why isn't there advice for the problem player, how to stop being that? And then I realized it's because probably, by and large, a majority of the people looking for advice online are game masters. Majority of people who become game masters are generally the kind of guys who are more into the games a little bit than the other people. Not to say that the players aren't as into it. I have many friends who play in my games who are super into it, but it's just that you're usually the guy with the most books. You're usually the guy everybody turns to and say, hey, how does this rule work? And you're like, I don't know. I guess I got to look it up. And so you're the one who's used to looking up information and looking up how to solve a problem, whereas the people who tend to play all the time are more used to turning to one person and saying, how do you solve that? And I think that's where the heart of that internet phenomenon comes from. Although I have found a lot of good player type advice out there. It's just kind of buried in GM advice because, well, it's just how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit that one of the things that I've enjoyed about the Fate-based games, Jadepunk, etc., is that emphasis on a more sort of collaborative experience. So rather than always turning to the same person and sort of saying, all right, you are the ultimate authority as far as every fact in the game world goes, just being able to sort of hand a bit of that back to the player, and when they say, oh, well, what's going on in, like, this district of the city, you can actually put that back to them and say, well, what do you think the main issue is in this district? And as a GM myself, I find it tends to be more interesting for me as a game, because if everything's 100% scripted and I know exactly what's going on, there's nothing that really keeps me interested. There's no surprises for me. Whereas if you've got other people putting ideas in, there's obviously, you get more out of it as well yourself.
Well, to talk about my experience with Fate all along is, for years, for almost 2 decades, for basically 14 years, I thought I was gaming wrong. Because I thought that there was a way you gamed, and I read all the adventures. I had to learn how to. I live in Montana. I know you don't live in America, so you don't maybe know how empty Montana really is. But we average about 1 person per square mile. So
right, okay.
There's or per 1.8 kilometers for those who are not in England or America. So it's a little nutty. You know, I did not know there wasn't. You know, back in the early 90s or late 80s, there wasn't anything telling you this is how you game. So you just kind of figured it out, and so I figured it out by reading in the back of books. And I was GMing before I gamed. It was 2 years. I was GMing for 2 years before I played a game under somebody else. So it was just kind of, I was making it up, and I always felt like I was doing it wrong until I ran into Fate and a couple other games like it. Until I ran into the indie movement, the Forge, and Fate, which isn't really part of any of those really, but kind of is. So it's, you know, I ran into these and I'm like, oh wait, there's a whole lot of people who play games just like I do, and for some reason we all thought we were doing it wrong, or that there was something wrong with games, or that there was something wrong, you know, and it turns out, no, we were all just having fun our own ways. And I think that's the big boom we've been having lately with Fate, and even with D&D 5 with its open design and all of that. We're having this kind of boom of openness where people are discussing their games. We're kind of doing what the Forge attempted to do before it became something else, and we're having these big discussions about what kinds of games do we like. Not, is this a role-playing game or is this not a role-playing game? Who knows? But what kind of games do we like, and how do we do that? What are the procedures that will get you to the direction you want to go? And I think that's the thing I like about Fate, is it gets me where I want to be as a GM.
I mean, I think one of the things you mentioned about the sort of move towards more sort of independent games is the fact that obviously sort of larger sort of Wizards of the Coast style sort of companies, they have a sort of core demographic of people that they're sort of selling the products to. And take D&D for instance, they don't tend to move too far from that sort of core demographic, whereas you're seeing quite a lot of sort of fairly professionally produced independent games now, rather than the sort of like some of the first independent stuff I did, which is like, you know, the sort of A4 stapled in the corner sort of supplements that have been sort of like photocopied. You're now seeing some very professional looking independent games that, because they're from smaller companies, they can explore sort of slightly sort of different ideas, or that vary more from the mainstream games.
Well, yeah, and that's it's interesting. Again, we live in a fascinating time. Like, Reroll wouldn't exist without the internet and without all the tools to make a lot of what we did easier. Because I live in Montana, he lives, Ryan, you live in Vegas, which is like 1,300 miles away. Ben lives in Seattle. That's another 9.5 hours driving away. It's just, we're all over the place, and we couldn't function. Like 10 years ago, we couldn't have done this. So
10 years ago, I wouldn't have so many friends either.
That's true.
Okay, so you mentioned Reroll Productions there. Now, I've read on your website that Jadepunk was initially conceived as a web series by yourself, Ryan. Could you give the people who are going to be watching this video, in your own words, a summary of how Jadepunk and Reroll Productions came about?
Sure. I was helping. I was a writer-director on a web series that is still in production, and hopefully it'll get made. Everyone's kind of abandoned it except for me and one other person. But it was called RP Group, and it was all about like role players. If you've seen Video Game High School, it's kind of that for gaming. So it was like, you know, they go to the table, they have their normal lives, but when they go into the game, we actually go in and do martial arts fight scenes and everything as the players or characters. And it was a comedy, and we wrote that, and then I started thinking, I really enjoyed coming up with the martial arts scenes, the fight scenes. So I told my friend Janelle Arante, who came up with me in martial arts, dojos all our lives, and so I said, let's do something martial arts. I mean, let's really do what we like, and we were spitballing ideas, and I was studying the Code of Ja at the time, which is what Wuja and all that's based on, and I was studying it, and I discovered that the code of the gunslinger, which is found only in Western fiction. It's not real. Like real life, that didn't really happen. Maybe there was one guy. I don't know. But it was basically the idea that you travel the world righting wrongs, and that was the code of Ja, and it's the code of the gunslinger, and the Wuja genre spans like 1,000 years of fictional history. So it was not unbelievable to take a gunslinger and plug him into like 1800s Hong Kong and have him going over there and meeting people and kind of forming this Jiangwu society and going out or joining the Jiangwu. Apparently, the Jiangwu has a different meaning in actual Wuxia than it does in Jadepunk. And but joining the Jiangwu, the warrior society, and actually fighting to right wrongs. And so we were going to do a web series about it. We didn't have a name. We didn't have anything like that. But when it looked like RP Group and everybody was going to kind of walk away, I said, well, you know what? I'm not walking away. I want to do this. And I was hardcore into Fate. Fate Core had only been out for a couple of months. Actually, we were working on the draft from the Kickstarter. They actually hadn't been published yet. And so I said,
I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember they would make changes, and then we'd be like, oh crap, we gotta change stuff now.
Yeah, I was like, Fred, please release the Fate system toolkit so I can see what I can play with. But I created I took what we had in mind. I created kind of a rough setting, and then I created the jade and how that would work. We had different colors and everything. I just had a base core concept, and then I kind of just went online and was like, hey, I need someone to look this over for me. And Jake was like, yeah, I'll do it. So I sent him the draft. We really quickly decided let's work on it.
That was during one of my super productive moments where I was putting out stuff all the time. I get those about once a year for about a month. I'll get incredibly productive, and then it stops.
But we did that in 2013, and we worked through it through the summer, and we were off and on with how much we were focusing on it because we both have lives. And then I finally decided, you know what, if we're going to do this, we need to do it. Let's go to Kickstarter. Let's just get a basic, we have all the rules we want. We know what we're going to do. Let's just get a basic thing done, and let's put it out to Kickstarter, and let's go. And we did that. And at the time, I didn't realize how massively successful it was when you look at other RPGs, Kickstarters. Most of them fail, and if they do succeed, it's like 3,000, 4,000. They just barely hit their mark, and then they struggle. We almost doubled our thing, our goal. So I was ecstatic when we saw that we were doing that. It was the very last day that we did it all. So it was to the wire. We were biting our nails. But when we did that, it was also right in the middle of the Kickstarter. Everyone looked at our setting and kind of got down on it and showed us where it was really bad. I mean, I kind of based this fictional world on real life. So we'd had a few people who looked at the premise prior to it. I remember Joshua A.C. Newman actually sent me a message on Google Plus saying, I'm not going to back this because this looks really racist. And so then I went to Ryan and I'm like, are we racist? Did that happen? And we looked over, and so we're like, well, maybe not. I don't know. And so we're like, well, we're going to fix the parts we can see. And then we went to Kickstarter, and everybody's like, well, this is kind of weak and not good. And we said, well, okay, yeah, we can do that. We can fix it. And so it became something much better than what either of us had initially, right. Mostly due to everybody telling us it could be better. So. Right. Yeah, and the thing was, when people started calling us racist, and then even after we changed it, it was still mentioning Jade and Punk and all. Everyone was like, well, that's racist, and they got like super hyper spiritual, and a lot of them, I was like, well, I know a little bit about this stuff, having grown up around like my wife is Asian. I've had like Asian influences all my life, And I was like, I think you might not understand exactly all of the meanings of Jade and religion and society and all that. But I didn't argue the point. And then, so I approached my sister-in-law who did the voiceover for the Kickstarter, who's Filipino. And then I approached all of the people I play tested with who are either Filipino or Japanese. And then, some other ethnicities too, but they were involved. I said, so what do you think? Are we being racist by making this? And they said, 90% of the video games out there are Koreans making games about white people. You are white people making games about Asians. That's pretty awesome. I think that's just fantastic. You guys are kind of flipping that. And who cares? I mean, nobody gets it right, and you don't get it right. I mean, that's more fun anyway. You don't get it right about your own history. Why would you get it right about ours?
Yeah, and I think our breakthrough though was when we realized two key things. One, that Kaosao City had to be more than it was, because when it started out, Kaosao City was kind of just this. It was a boom town, but it was very different in how it ran and all of that. And we realized it had to be something more than what it was. And then I think we realized, when we realized that, we realized the rest of the world needed to be fleshed out more. Because I think that's where a lot of the complaints were coming from, is that the ideas in there were interesting, but the setting didn't allow for it. And so when we added more to the Arish, and we added more to the Tuyangan, and we added more to the Kayumi and the Naramau, and even I hope the Almak and the Nadasan and the Kushmet. I think it gave it a more cosmopolitan feel. It gave it more of a feel of this is a real place, as opposed to this is a bunch of stereotypes all sitting there. And while GMs play in stereotypes, writers can't.
Those names didn't even exist at the beginning of the Kickstarter. They were something really different, and then everybody said, when we decided, okay, we need to change this up completely. If we're going to be a fictional world, let's be fictional. And we created, in a day, we created all of these new nations, and the whole setting changed in a week.
I remember it because, Ryan, you came to me and you said, I need a bunch of religions. And so I was like, okay, I'll write, I'll give you 1,200 words on religions, because I study various religions, comparative religion and theology, and I find the whole concept of people's worldviews very interesting. I like to know why things happen. So yeah, so I was like, well, I've got a bunch of books on religion and in various religions on the world, and I've been around the world 4 or 5 times, so I could write something that looks like a religion, So I whipped, and then Ryan came back to me and he said, "That's great. Could you cut it down to 400 words?" And so I was like, well, yeah, okay. And so that's what we got the little blurbs in the book. But I do think those little blurbs added a lot. They made everything again feel a little more like a real place as opposed to a pastiche or just a, well, it's Hong Kong but without the Hong Kong. And I think that was our best move, is when we moved away from making it a stereotype of a certain period in Shanghai or Hong Kong, and we moved it into becoming its own place. Because I based the city on Butte, which is a city in Montana, and you should look it up. The history is pretty fascinating. It was built on basically this giant silver and copper mine that just went for almost a century. It was the richest hill in the world, they called it. And so I was like, well, that's interesting. I can use that. And then there were all kinds of vigilantes running around there, and I'm like, well, we can use that. That makes sense. And so we just, again, we started taking parts and making a new whole, as opposed to just taking parts and saying, see, it's a part. You can just use it. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean the blurbs in the book very much put me in the mind of almost like a sort of fictional travel guide where you're getting like a taster of the setting, and obviously you can run your game based just on the taster bits that are there, but it also gives you the option to give you an idea of how to expand it if you want to go into more detail, and obviously it leaves room for that expansion. without just sort of saying like give you every last detail. So I'm pretty sure that each GM's version of Cowsow would be quite different to maybe the next GM's, because there's a lot of room for expansion and sort of putting your own ideas in there, which is something I quite enjoy in games where I've got room to sort of, within the boundaries of the setting, sort of put your own little sort of spin on things.
Right, and we're actually when I was designing kind of the layout or the outline of what everything was going to be like, I took Freedom City supplement from Mutants and Masterminds by Steve Kenson, and I took
supplement, by the way.
Yeah, and I took that and I said, okay, these are the things they have, these are the things we need, and then I also took Strange Fate, Kerberos Club from Mike Olson, and I said, okay, this is how we need to line it up. And then if you read the Naramel Marshall expansion, everything's really been written as, this is the tales from the people who have been there. Doesn't necessarily mean they were right or that they had an accurate perception of things, or that they knew everything. Like even the map is drawn very abstract, so you can just say, it's here. And then when you erase that, you have no idea where you just were, which is kind of like when I went to Manhattan. It's like, whoa, okay. All we have is a subway map. It's not very accurate above ground, and so we knew kind of where things were, and it made a better experience. And it almost felt like our Manhattan has this here, and even though that's in Manhattan, you can actually confirm. In Cowsow City, you can't. It's that travel guide thing, and then the Naramel expansion, it's Arnold P. Winsworth III giving his experiences on the martial arts and his opinions and what he saw, but he's not a warrior. He wasn't trained. He just traveled the world. So he could be wrong about the martial arts. He didn't see all of them. He just saw a couple, and he's telling his experience and what he heard. And any table could be like, yeah, well, Arnold was an idiot, and that's not even right. He totally got this martial art wrong. Or how could he not see this martial art? He didn't even go. That's the most popular one. He didn't even go over there. I mean, he's an idiot. Any table could take what they want and play with it and make it theirs, and that was the core design. Like every time we started writing too much into a section, me and Jake both told each other, whoa, back off. You're giving too much detail.
Well, it was more once we started knocking things into concrete, because we both kind of have this thing where we love our darlings, and so we'll start, like Ryan loves the Irish, absolutely loves them, and so when he would write about them, he'd write these huge treatises on what is and is not Irish, and I'm like, wait, we can't nail that down, and he's like, but it's true, and I'm like, yeah, it's true, but we can't write that down because then it will be true forever, and then we'll have to remember that, because the real key to the way we do our world building is that we don't have to remember much because everything's iffy and up in the air. We're just like, well, this is possible, like in the Jadepunk books. They're examples. These are possibilities. They might not exist. Temujin may not have actually existed, but what we do know is the city he came from does exist, and so we know a little bit about the city and where it is, but not much because it's not an important city. That's the only important thing that ever really happened there.
But go on.
But yeah, so I mean, at the end of the day, we want it to be yours. So you take the parts of the city and you take the parts of the world you like. Well, with the John, even with your game, I've been watching. You've taken a very different take on Cowsow City and the nations. They're now four houses.
I was watching with my wife, and my wife was like, "That's not right." I was like, "What do you mean it's not right? It's his game. It's absolutely right. This is what it's intended."
It starts out with them crashing their ship into the ground. It's brilliant.
Yeah, I loved it. It was and my wife was like, "That's not right," but I was like, "Yeah, you're the same person who scoffs at comic book movies. Go home." And
because our goal was to not have canon, really, to have a canon that wasn't a canon. Like have a coat rack you could hang things on, but no things hung on it that need to be there.
Which is a challenge.
Sorry, I was just going to say, very much with the game that I ran, you were talking about the things you need to know about Cowsow. I basically sort of took that and a few of other little bits and pieces, sort of put them on like one side of A4, and then said to the players, right, there's something for you to read in the run-up to it, and then everything else that's come about in the city that differs from the main book, although we've expanded on, is stuff that the players and myself sort of come up with together. So it's almost, it's not just me sitting down as the GM and going, "Oh, this is my version of Chaos City that you're going to play in." It's sort of our collaborative version that we've all created between us, because there's a lot of stuff in there that I probably wouldn't have thought of myself if I'd have just sat down and done it on my own.
Right. I mean, that's why we put in the book we mention anyway that there's no super martial arts. But why not? If you want it, go for it. You know, we give that option because we want it to be your game. It's a challenge for writing fiction because when I started this, I told Jake from the beginning, I still want to do a web series of Jadepunk. I still want to do fictions, and I want to do comic books, and I want to do movies, and I want to do. I want Marvel. I want to be Marvel. You know, for me, I'm always thinking that high. For everything, I think that high, and I push towards that. And if I get there, great. If I don't, oh well. There's more stuff. But and so one of the things that's a challenge is for us to write fiction and not change the setting. And so really, what our fictions kind of become is and I think fans will really be able to see this, or at least tack onto it, is like Star Wars had the expanded universe, which was not considered canon by any of the movies, but it existed and everyone liked it. And that's kind of what our fiction is becoming, is we might do a whole bunch of stuff, but this is expanded universe. You don't have to, you could throw it all out the window or use it as inspiration or follow it all 100%. It's up to you.
Oh yeah, my fictional story is going to change a lot of the world, so it's not real. It didn't actually happen. It just could happen. It's possible. So.
Because that's and it's in the subtitle, Jadepunk Tales from Chaos City. These are stories from there, and not all tales are true. And so that's one of the things, and we need to be more explicit about it as we go forward and do things. Also, it occurs to me we could probably get the 5 things you need to know and actually put on the website. Because that's kind of a promotional thing. That seems like a good idea, actually. Yeah, why didn't I think of it first, right? It really should have been there. But we do need to be more explicit about that kind of thing.
In a way, I think the whole idea not to sort of drill down to too much level of detail for the setting, it almost gives it a bit more more sort of texture and a bit more sort of verisimilitude to make it seem more like a real place, because even with like real world history and real world places, there's a lot that, although those places exist, that maybe doesn't get recorded correctly or isn't widely known. So I think almost settings, oddly enough, they do feel a bit less real when you've got that sort of level of detail to like the nth degree. Because I could talk about New York or somewhere that really exists, but because I've not been there and I don't know all about it, there's still parts of that sort of city that's a sort of veiled to me, and I only have a sort of a surface level of detail.
Right, and I've been there, and I still have a vague, like when I play in there, I'm like, okay, this is happening in Chinatown. I remember Chinatown, but I don't know every nook and cranny. And I honestly it was around 5 points, and I'm familiar with that because I'm into Irish history as we came to America. Because I can trace my roots back to Ireland before we came here. So I was interested in that. But even though I've been there, I don't know everything. And so, yeah, I could totally buy that. If I wrote a visitor's guide to New York, it would be 90% wrong. And so it would be a lot of vagueness. I could totally buy that and how it makes it feel real.
Now, we've talked a little bit about some of the issues you guys faced with sort of bringing Jadepunk together. Were there any actual issues when it came to taking your initial idea that you had and translating it into the actual Fate system and making it an actual playable game?
No, because we started there. We started saying this is going to be Fate. We had a very core, basic idea of the setting, and we started with Fate and branched from there. As okay, like Fate informed the setting as much as the setting informed how much we changed a Fate, because there's a lot of changes.
I think our biggest issues were the professions and the dueling mechanics, because we had about 8 different versions of each of those before we finally nailed those down. And Ryan and I went at it for months, actually, about the professions. Whether they were too loose or whether they were too narrow, and I'm proud to say that I think I may have won the last conversation. I don't know, but I felt like we came out of that with something closer to my idea than Ryan's. Although the dueling came a lot closer to Ryan's idea than mine. Although again, there was a lot of compromise.
I think the biggest complication, I guess, conflict is in my head, but there was a lot of that too. I think the biggest complication we had was a lack of a workflow. This was both of our very first professional RPG on a team and that kind of setting, and the workflow was just terrible. And it took us a solid year or more to finally understand how workflow should happen. I mean, we didn't even have a game document. We didn't know
we were already done with the document before we actually figured out, hey, wait, maybe we should talk with the editor more, or maybe we should do these other things, because we didn't know. We had no idea what we were doing. We were guessing.
We didn't put a game document together, like a setting document, until August, and we haven't even really fleshed it out this last August. Yeah. We haven't fleshed it out because we were like, well, we know it, and we're trying to bang out product because we owe it to the Kickstarter. So we haven't even really worked on those things. And so building and for me especially, because I was mostly the project coordinator, I'm dealing with the artists and the layout and the editing, and I'm taking Jake's writing and applying it to the draft, and I'm doing all of this project coordination stuff that for me I could really see a lack of workflow. And in my eyes, it was a huge complication to getting that off the ground, and it was the biggest area I had to learn about. I had to learn a lot with this I've grown a lot since the beginning of 2014, but the biggest area was a lack of workflow. And now that I'm moving into our Reroll Productions' next project, I'm finding that my lessons I learned about workflow are paying off in spades. We're moving smooth. It's good. It's nice. We're moving quickly, and no one is confused about what's going on, what they should be doing. It's not perfect, but it's much better. And so even the Jadepunk workflow is becoming more solid. You know, Jesse Ferguson actually had this classy idea of, hey, when you're done with the draft, just throw it on Drive, and everyone can see it, and everyone can play with it and start getting work on it. And that didn't even happen until September. So, you know, we were
October, something like that. Yeah, it was. I think it was Green Jade, so it must have been August.
Yeah, it was all of us. But then, you know, we started. It was in the summer we started really focusing on this because we had Benjamin Feehan. He took over VC. I'm sorry, that's Vigilance Committee. He took that over for me. And
I think that was your smartest. I think that was your smartest move. I think that's the smartest move we made all along. Actually, is bringing Ben on to do that, because Ben has a gift for it.
Right. Yeah. Well, part of my growing process was, and Jake, this is where most of the conflict came from, was while writing Jadepunk, was very much about controlling things. Mm-hmm. I was very like, okay, not that this is mine. I never cared about that. But like a lack of trust, I guess, of a lack of trust that someone else could take it. And for me in my history, you know, I was a bodyguard and I ran ops for bodyguarding companies, and they're a bunch of knuckle draggers. You have to be on top of them, and you can't trust them to run stuff on their own. And then, you know, when I was doing this stuff in film, I was the one who had all the technical skills, so I couldn't trust anyone. So I came into this with that mindset. And then when it came to when Jadepunk was finally done, and we published it and put it out there, and I got the physical copy in my hand, I read it cover to cover, and I because I created it and worked on it and did all, I hated most of it, but you normally do when you do that, and so I read it and I'm thinking to myself, you know, a lot of the good parts are not mine. A lot of them are, but a lot of them aren't, and I'm the one who put everything together, so I saw. You know, I know what parts were Jake's, what parts were, because I'm the one plugging it all into the draft. And then I was like, you know,
I can't even tell anymore looking through Jadepunk. I know which parts I wrote, but some of them I'm like, I think I had a hand in that, but I can't remember. I don't know if Ryan wrote some extra stuff into my stuff.
Yeah, and when we go back and look at mechanics, you know, we both came up with that together. But I looked at it and I said, you know, he can do it. He's got it. I'm being a fool. And so right then I started looking at everything, and he was like, well, I could help out with the supplements. I could do it. I said, you know what? Take Jadetech. And that was kind of it was hard for me. I don't think Jake knows this, but it was hard for me at the moment to just say, here, just you write it. It's yours. And then I called Ben around that same time, and I was like, hey, you know what? Because he posted his home game, and he got the setting incredibly well. So I was like, you know what? Do you want to work on it? And he was like, oh, yes. And so I handed over I wrote like 3,500 words on Vigilance Committee 1. And then I was so just inundated with work that had to be done for Reroll Productions because this was the point we were only a couple months old. We just published our first book a month before this. And there was so much work going on, I couldn't handle the writing workload. And I gave it to him, and at first I was like, ugh, and I even had him, you turn in every single scene to me. I want to see him. I was like but then after a while I was like, you know what? No, I'm not going to micromanage. These guys, the more I let them go, the more gold they make. So it was a learning, and now for me it's like Ben's like, hey, you know what? Do you want to see my outline? No, just send it to me. I mean, it's not quite that loose, but it's still like, yeah, okay, let me see the outline. But I trust these guys now. Jake's like, hey, what do we need to put in this? I'll say, well, okay, here's some things I'm writing that I need that this color Jade needs, and here's some devices that we know we need because we already have the art for it. But otherwise, it's like, hey, Jake, just do it. And I
will say this: my biggest problem, I guess looking back, my biggest problem was organizational. Not so much on the logistics level. I know how much I have to write a day. I know, that part I got. But where do I put what part? Because, Ryan, you can attest. I handed you my Game Master Guide part, and it was just 8,000 words of rambling because there was no organization to it. I just don't have a brain for that. But with Jadepunk, I was freaking out until you handed me, okay, I need these 4 sections, and they need to go in this order. And I was like, okay, good. I can do that. I can fill in gaps all day long, but I need to see the form. And so Ryan was. There's a reason I didn't do anything before this, even though I've been writing games since I was 15. I'm 33 now, and the reason is because Ryan was really good at helping me figure out what I need to put in what order. Because if you'll read my other games that I wrote for the Game Chefs, they're not bad. They make sense, but the order of them is wrong, and I realize that now. I don't know really what to do about it. I guess I could go back and fix them. I kind of want to do something with Hollow Realm eventually, but yeah, I guess that was my biggest problem throughout the whole thing was how can you organize this in a good way, and it was one of the things that looking through Jadepunk now. I wish I could go back and change the Khao City chapter a little bit, just how I put the things together so that it flows more better. But it's not bad. It's just like, oh man, I could have put this here, and then these 2 things would have formed a thematic chain, and that would have been great. So yeah, I guess looking back, I think it was Ryan. Your need for order actually helped me organize my thoughts as I wrote them, so right. There you are.
Yeah, but I've learned a lot, and so our next project is much smoother as far as where we're at in the process. And we've only been working on it. I've worked on it for about a year and a half now. I started working on it when we worked on Jadepunk, but it's changed and it's gone through, and I got the team together to work on it, and everything's working much better. That was a huge problem with getting everything together. It wasn't so much getting Jadepunk to fit in Fate. It was, as a company, as a team, how do we put this together? And that was difficult. And I think that everybody's going to go through that if they're getting into the process.
Well, especially if like Brian and I are both really strong personalities. So, we butted heads and we had hard times figuring out how we fit, like how everything made it together. But luckily our love of the game and our shared life experiences and all of that kind of helped build a working partnership that works really well.
And our friendship. We didn't want to make anything break that. Reroll Productions is all about people first. If someone can't, they make their own deadlines. I don't tell everybody what the deadline is. We come up together. They tell me, I think I can have this by then. Okay, cool. Then that's your deadline because you said it. And if they can't, they're like, oh, my wife was sick. Oh, dude, don't worry about it. Just tell me when you can have it. People are first for me all the time, and I would rather ditch everything than have a relationship break because of business or because of, something was, wrong in one person's eyes. No. Let's throw this whole project away and let's start over. I would rather do that. For me, the business is just my way of doing what I love and getting paid for it. Not very well, but getting paid for it. That's all it is to me. So for me, it's a lot more about the camaraderie and the community and than it is anything else.
One of the things that, in my opinion, makes the Jadepunk game in particular so much fun to play is that I could see that you guys seem to put a lot of effort into making a sort of interesting spin on the fate system, like a sort of build of fate, if you will, but it doesn't add a load of unnecessary sort of extra complexity to it. I mean, I've sort of homebrewed some stuff myself, and I made that mistake when I was doing it. I've seen a couple of other supplements that have done it where there's just like a lot of extra stuff that's been lumped onto the core system, and it sort of takes what's a fairly sort of elegant, sort of simple system, and then just sort of bolts loads of extra bits on it haphazardly. Whereas the two bits that really sort of stand out for me, the sort of dueling system and the asset system that you guys have added on, although they are sort of additional, slightly different ways of looking at the system, they do feel very streamlined, or like refinements of the original system rather than just sort of extra bits that have been dropped on top of it.
Right. Yeah. When we were putting that together, my design philosophy is don't stick, because my martial arts background is Jeet Kune Do, and that's Bruce Lee's style, and it's all about no way is the way, no limitations, all that kind of stuff. Take what's useful, discard what's useless, keep that which you created of your own. That's been my background and my way of thinking for the last 15, 16 years. So when I came in here and we were doing this, I was like, I'm not afraid to throw everything established as fate out the window. I don't care if people don't recognize it as fate, because for me it's about what works for the game. And so, but I wasn't going to do that just because I was going to do that. I was going to take what was useful and what worked. So what we did was we sat down and said, okay, here's our setting. What is required? What's important? What are the most important things about it? Dueling is huge in Wuxia and in the gunslinger lore and all that. Dueling has to be big. But also, one of the things we wanted, it has to be simple. We did not want half an hour or an hour of two people doing stuff and the rest of the group goes and gets ice cream.
Something Ryan and I both agreed on was that a lot of the times the games with the really big fight systems, that are based around fighting, end up making these fights that last for hours. And you're like, but that's not how a fight goes, because both he and I studied martial arts. He was Jeet Kune Do. I studied Shotokan Karate, Taekwondo, Aikido, and Daini Gaijiro. I'm a big fan of really linear martial arts, although I've studied circular. And so most fights are over in seconds. But also during most fights, it's the hardest work you'll ever do in your whole life in those seconds. By the end of it, you can barely breathe or stand because you're shaking and you're breathing hard. It's just horrible. And so we wanted to get the feel of a fight. We wanted that speed, that when you get into a duel, we want it to be done, and then it's over. And I think we managed it. I think the dueling system works really well at getting really, really fast fights out of the way while still making them somewhat pretty.
And there's also the conversation that Jake was talking about earlier, Star Wars. Because what I was thinking of the entire time when doing the dueling scene were the scenes around the early parts of Fearless, Jet Li's Fearless, where he's fighting on that raised platform and he's just whipping everybody in the town. And because some of them are really quick, and then some of them, like when I remember the scene when his father fought somebody in the beginning of the movie, and it was a fast fight relatively, but there was enough back and forth and description and quality that it stands out in your mind. And so we also needed to say, okay, we need to represent martial arts fights, but at the same time, the same system needs to work if two gunslingers are drawing down on each other, and it's just they pull and they fire one, maybe 3 or 4 shots, and it's over. We have to be able to do both. So a gunslinger would work a little differently, I think, where the actual duel would take place with them staring each other down, moving their coat, and you're kind of setting all this up, and then the very last roll to see who gets that last victory point is the actual draw. That's how I would play it if I was doing it, but there's a lot of different ways you can run with it. But then we also said, okay, well, because of how we set this up, gunslingers need to be able to fight martial artists in the same system. And this works. It's just the contest mechanics. It doesn't matter what you're using. The mechanics of it are the same. It's how you're describing it. And that was a big thing. When we did assets, that was something where we said, really, we weren't going to go with assets. What we wanted was invention. This game needs to have invention. It's a steampunk kind of game.
It also goes down to professions. If you look at professions, 4 of the professions cover a lot of ground. 2 of the professions cover very specific things. Those 2 professions are the most important professions in our setting. Engineer covers one thing, building stuff or taking things apart. And so we wanted that to have just as much. We wanted MacGyver. We wanted, we wanted that scene. You know, the scene where they build something, where something gets made and it solves the problem. And it's interesting, and we wanted there to be tactical choices there and the ability to manipulate the system a little bit. The same with the fight. Again, we wanted the fights to be central, and so if you look at the professions, you've got aristocrat that covers the gamut of pretty much all social interaction, which is all human interaction is covered with one skill. Explorer is the ability to move. Okay, that covers a lot of ground, figuratively and literally. And then you've got Scoundrel, that covers all subterfuge, which is a lot. And then you've got Scholar, and that covers everything, really. It's knowledge of everything. So it's like, and then we've got these 2 very narrow things. And I remember talking with Ryan about it, and he was like, should we broaden them? Should we narrow them? I said, no, these are important. Because these are narrow, because these are just this thing, it emphasizes within the game mechanics the importance of these things, and it allows people to be good at them even if they're not primary in them.
Right. Yeah, and so before I approached Mike Olson, I was doing is I was developing this thing where I said, okay, you can create an advantage. And that's kind of the typical Fate. I want to create a Tony Stark armor. I want to be Tony Stark. Okay, well then you're just going to be awesome at creating advantages. But then I was like, that's cool. But for me, this is a personal view. Aspects are overdone with Fate. I feel there's too much focus on them. So,
they can't. Yeah.
Yeah, and so for me, it was like, you know what though? There's only one thing. I mean, you've got your skills, you got aspects. You can create. There's one thing in Fate you can't create, and that is stunts. And so I wanted a system where you could create a stunt, and so you could create a Red Jade 6-shooter just like, oh, this gunslinger wants to fight you. You know what? You prepare. You talk with him. You learn how to draw a gun. I'm going to go make it for you. And have them actually make a gun that's useful. Not just here's an aspect, and then spend a whole bunch of Fate points making that useful mechanically. But create it fictionally with that aspect, and then create it mechanically with a stunt. And so I looked really heavily at the and Mike Olson actually wrote this too, was the gadget system in the Fate System Toolkit. And so what I was thinking is, okay, you spend if you create and if you want to do like an accelerated version of Jadepunk, I would say this is it. Create an advantage, and then spend a Fate point to give it a stunt, and then that's Jadepunk accelerated right there for the asset system. But if you
look at that, we're designing stuff on the fly on your show right now.
But if you wanted like what we wanted was a little more tinkering, because that's the fun of the engineer. You're tinkering with stuff. And one of the things I liked bulldogs, and we played with that, but we didn't want money to be incredibly important in the game. We wanted that to still be kind of vague. So instead, I looked at Mike Olson's gifts from Strange Fate, which I guess he also took and ported into Atomic Robo in a way. So what I did was I said, hey, first I asked him, hey, what part of this can I take? And he said, any of it. It's all open source. You can take it all. So I said, well, I imagine that since you wrote this, you have some ideas of how it could be updated. Do you want to write that for me? And he's like, yeah. So I sent him what I had about this whole create advantage thing and making that create stunts. And then he was like, well, I wrote the gadget guide, so I know exactly where you're coming from with adding flaws. And that was the thing that tripped me up, was how are we going to do flaws and add that in there. And then he wrote the asset system. And it was up to us to play test it, because he just wrote it, sent it off, and it was done. And he did a great job, even first time just doing it. And he did the editing and all that kind of stuff with it. But that was where that came from. And then during I think one of the big things that's under talked about in Jadepunk was the Jake's face system. He created the system of creating NPCs because I was like, dude, I want to be able to make an NPC in no time. Just bam, here's an NPC, and throw it out there. And then he created the need and secret, and he plugged all this stuff in, and it worked out.
Really, just comes back to the fact that I'm a really lazy GM. And so I've been using that system forever. Like, that's just what I've always used to make NPCs, because I'm like, all right, I need whatever skills they have, so I'll put a skill rating down, and that's every role I use for them, because I don't want to come up with more than one. And then I'll just give them a need and a secret. And look at that, we got drama. Awesome.
Right.
Problem solved.
And then around that time, I was messing with when I got his GM guide back, the GM section. I was looking at it because I was making all the NPCs for the section, and I was looking at it, and I was like, there needs to be some easier way to create settings or create adventures, and that was around the time that I wrote the thing that has put me on the map for Fate. Everyone thinks of me like I'm attached to the bronze rule and all this. I created the Fate fractal. I'm like, no, that came before me. But it was my adventure fractal. How to take an adventure and make the Fate fractal, make an adventure out of it. And so everyone kind of my website still gets like 300 hits a day just on that page of people learning and discovering that. But and it seems like everyone can make it work except me. I can't make that work in a game to save my life, but everyone else can. But so for Jadepunk, I was like, okay, you know what? How can we make this work? And I knew that we had to eventually have our adventure guides and supplements and stuff, because you can't have a company and not have that stuff, because some people just need that. So I said, okay, how can I port this over in a way that I could make it work, because I can't, but also a way that allows us to still create adventures. And then I created the scene fractal, which was basically your character. We've all had this in every single game. You made this perfect guide of where the train tracks everyone's going to go. And then with the very first scene, all the players, boom, just went off, did their own thing. And you're like, whoa, what do I do? So the scene fractal is how to use the Fate fractal, the bronze rule of Fate, treat everything like a character, and create a scene in 20 seconds. And especially if you've done it before, then maybe 10 seconds. And so it was all about, here's a scene, here's everything you need to know, how to create a scene and go. And then you know what you got to get them back to. So you create this scene with the intention of getting them back on track. And I've always been kind of good at that, spitballing and just getting players back on track. But this was also a way that you can just, and the way that I use it now, is I create the plot hook to get everyone involved. And then for the rest of the game, it's nothing but scene fractals. And that's just all it is, until the very end scene, because I kind of have an idea where that's going to be, even though it's half a fractal. And that is the thing I think that a lot of people, maybe it's just because it's just a sidebar, but a lot of people are like, yeah, well, Jadepunk added all these things. I'm like, no, look at that. That, to me anyway, that's the goal. That's the thing we brought. Look at that. It's only a sidebar, but look at it. And that, and also how Jake's Faces works for creating organizations. You create it just like a face, and you're done. And it's the GM section by itself, and the Zhang Wu section. What is the Zhang Wu or something like that? I don't remember the title of it. It's been a year now. But those things, the way those two sections work, I think those are the big things that Jadepunk really, and the way we're like, hey, you want something here in the map? Just beep, here it is. The looseness of it, I think, gets under-talked about with Jadepunk, because everyone looks at what specific things did they change about Fate. But really, these are the things we added to Fate that I think are worthy of calling additions. I think these are the things that you could take, even if you didn't take anything from Jadepunk mechanically, and you could apply it to Atomic Rowboat or to whatever else you're playing, and they would function and work very well.
Well, and I'm stealing the adventure fractal. I'm working on a big fantasy hack for, not hack so much as a big fantasy expansion kind of a thing for Fate, because I want to do Tolkien, and I think Tolkien can be done, and so I built an exploration and travel fractal, as well as a whole session fractal. Basically, the idea is to fractalize everything and build it in such a way that it's easy. Because I design games to solve problems for me. And so I have a problem, and that problem is I don't like coming up with stuff all the time. I like having a format that I can just be like, well, I'll circle this part, okay, good, adventure started, problem solved, everybody go. And so, yeah, I've been using it in my games for a year now, and I think sometime late this year, next year, something like that, we'll get that finished up and out and ready to go.
I was going to ask, is there anything that you guys had to chop out or that didn't make the final cut into Jadepunk that sort of looking back now, sometime after it's been released, you think, oh, well, I wish we'd been able to include that, or maybe we could have like looked at that in a different way?
I don't think so, because we always knew supplements were coming.
Yeah, and we wanted it small. I think, I mean, there were things we cut, like a big chunk of the religion parts and chunks of the major nations and the lesser nations. We cut bits of those out. But I think that's fine. If there were things I could add in to a second edition, Ryan and I have a list of things we want to put in the second edition.
But that's also, we've had a year to really think about this and get tons of fan feedback. So yeah, we would a second edition would look kind of different. Yeah,
and we love feedback, by the by. So anybody who's a fan of the game, go ahead and tell us what you think.
And go ahead, because only like 2 people have done that, and yeah, everyone else is like, there's a lot of gush. You know, sometimes, I mean, maybe not too brutal. We did put our 2 years of our lives into it, but you know,
don't make me cry. But definitely tell us what you think, because we're very interested in how people are using our game and what they liked about it and what they didn't like, what they would like to see. Because without that information, we're still going blind basically in a lot of areas where we're just like, people are saying it's wonderful. Well, okay, what was wonderful? All of it. Okay, I guess we'll just keep doing what we were doing then. I don't know.
Keep on. Keep on.
I was saying to someone last night when I was talking about getting feedback for running particular sessions, and I was saying, don't get me wrong, when someone comes to you and says, oh, that was a great session, loved everything about it, obviously that's a great feeling to know you've run a good session. But in terms of actual specific feedback that's sort of useful for maybe sort of improving areas that perhaps weren't so great, it's not terribly useful. So I mean, I've always gone for a sort of like a more sort of structured sort of like feedback form that I send to that I make available to the players, so they've got more of an idea where I say, oh, so what do you think about this aspect of the game and that aspect, rather than just that whole thing of if you just want a blank piece of paper and you say, oh, write down what you thought about it. A lot of people look at the blank piece of paper and go, oh, I'm not really sure what to put down. Having a bit of structure on there can sort of help them out with that.
That's a great point. And one thing I want to make clear is that when people say it's awesome and great, and I thank you very much. I'm very grateful. It's not to say those comments are bad. I don't consider them feedback. It's just like, wow, praise, thank you. I mean, we wrote something and you guys like it. That's the best feeling. I mean, I could almost do it for free if the electric company would understand feelings for payment. I would do it for free that way. But otherwise, I mean, it's very much appreciated when people do tell us they like our things. Or when we find people doing reviews and all they have to say is good things about it. That does not in any way ruin my day, so don't misconstrue what I said.
Oh no,
That,
I got a big set of links where I just go and look at them when I'm feeling down. So it's just people saying nice things.
too, huh?
Yeah, I was going to say, if someone does have feedback about this product or any other sort of Reroll production products, what would be the best way for them to submit that feedback to yourselves?
Well, we have a contact form on our website, rerollproductions.com, but I don't think that would probably be the best place. We have a community, the Reroll community, and if you go to Reroll Production, to our website, you can find a link to our community. You also find it at jadepunk.com. You can find the link to the community. All of our Reroll store has a link, and the community, it's a forum, and we're being more active more often on it because when we first created it, we just knew we needed a forum. Now, though, we're coming up. I mean, we've got the new game coming and things like that, so we're expanding the forums and we're spending more time on our community. If you drop a line on the community, not just me or Jake, but we've got fans like Christopher Ruthenbeck. He comes on our forum quite often, and a few other people, and you get all kinds of answers there. So feedback. We also have an errata section on there. You can report an errata. We've had a few people do that. So yeah, I would say the community is the best place. And even if you just post ranting about it and you go back and forth with other people in the community about the subject, that doesn't hurt. I mean, we're gonna see it. So
yeah. Yeah, if you go to Google Plus and you hashtag Jadepunk, we'll probably see it eventually. So.
Right, and yeah, if you click on my name, Ryan M. Danks on Google, they have. I posted the other. I think it was maybe last night or the night before. Hashtags that Reroll Productions is using right now. That if you use one of these hashtags, at least within the week, we're gonna see your post. So if you want to make sure, like you post about Jadepunk or the new game or whatever, you want to or the Iconic Adventures, which is the Patreon we've got going on right now for fiction. If you use one of these, we're gonna have one of these hashtags. We'll be able to spot your thing. Maybe not that day, but we'll see it because we do monitor those hashtags.
Okay, that's great. What I'll do is after this interview, I'll go and have a look at that post, and then I can put the hashtags in the description of the video, so people watching it.
Oh, okay, yeah.
They've got the hashtags there, and also I'll put the Reroll Productions web address there, so they can go to that off the video. Anyone who's interested in pursuing that.
Google Plus is kind of ephemeral, so like hardcore feedback. We may not remember that you put it there. We'll read it, but we may not remember where to find, because it's hard to find stuff on Google Plus once your feed goes 3 days. Especially with like me and Jake, we've got hundreds of people in our circles, and I log on in the morning. I've easily got 20 to 50 notifications. Things get lost real fast. The community is a good way to do it because we monitor that, and it's there, and it's not going anywhere. It's easy to find. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, if you want to get a hold of me or Jake or anyone with Reroll, Google Plus, that's how we found each other.
Yeah, and we love talking about games, so.
So we're on there, and it's easy to find us and talk about it.
Excellent. I was also just to talk about the various inspirations that went into Jade. You obviously talked about the idea of martial arts and that code of the gunslinger. However, there's also this is like a strong sort of dystopian feel. I mean, it almost feels like sort of cyberpunky sort of feel to the setting, with the sort of the giant sort of jade mining corporations and the corrupt government. So, what were some of the other sort of influences that you sort of brought into the game aside from the martial arts influences and the code of the gunslinger?
Well, we needed to bring punk, and Jake understood that very well, and so there has to be empire, there has to be something to fight against and rebel against, and that made the Zhang Wu perfect. I mean, it was a good fit, but it was really just okay. We've got Jade and everything that does, and all. What's the punk? And that was exactly what you said.
Yeah, I was heavily influenced by Stevenson and Gibson, as well as China Mayville's new Crobuzon books. It starts with Perdido Street Station, which I don't know why. I don't actually like China Mayville's work much. I don't hate it or anything. It doesn't appeal to me. But somehow reading his work makes me way more creative. I think it's just the layers of description he puts down and how everything interacts, because he's way more interested in his world than really in his stories, and that comes through, and the world comes through his stories very well. So, yeah, I was reading a lot of Herbert and Gibson and Stevenson and Mayville just to really get into the mindset of language and ecology and governmental systems and religious systems and how all of those things interact. People laugh when I say Dune was my biggest influence, but it really was. Dune is about a substance that's only found in one place. It's about a group of people who are oppressed by the powerful, who rise up and fight back. It's about all of the things Jadepunk is about. It's just set differently. Like, it's in a different setting, but it's the language, the way it feels, the way I love all of that. I love the way you can play with the setting. And so Jadepunk was really influenced by the punk aesthetic, the idea that a bunch of super individuals, like actual individuals, stand up and say, hey, this is wrong, and we're going to break the system because the system is inherently broken. Or Bruce Bowers said it. You can do Martin Luther King Jr. in Jadepunk. You can do non-combat confrontation. You can stand there and do a peaceful protest. You can change the world however you want, and that was the thing. We wanted to build a world that was worth changing, because I don't like nihilism. I don't like the idea of. I like empowerment. I like the idea of empowerment, and I like what power does. And I think this is a great kind of thing in saying, okay, power can be bad, but you also have power. What are you going to do with it? Because here's the bad version, you know. So, and so that was kind of our goal, and so I'm glad the punk aesthetic came across. But yeah.
I think one of the things that struck me, I think it's possibly one of the first things you say in the book, certainly very early on, is you make that statement that it's a game about people changing their world by standing up for what they believe is right.
Yeah, that was an early thing. Both Ryan and I agreed on, is that we wanted to make a game where people did the right thing. We were tired of murder hobos. We were tired of, and there's fun to be had playing murder hobos. There is. I've had loads of fun doing it. I played Rifts for years. Where you just wander around with the biggest cannon money can buy, and you just shoot everything, and it's awesome. There's nothing inherently wrong with that in the imagination space. But at heart, both Ryan and I really believe in doing good, in doing the right thing, and trying to be good people. Even if you fail, trying itself is worth something. And so we wanted a game that was about doing the right thing, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Now we've mentioned Ben Feehan a couple of times earlier on. Obviously works for you guys on Reroll Productions, and he was also good enough to send me a few additional questions to ask you guys on air. And the first one he sent me was, I believe this is directed at both of you, saying, can you talk about how your personal training and sort of history with martial arts has contributed to the Jadepunk setting, and perhaps your approach to role-playing games in general?
Well, obviously, it was the reason I created it in the first place. You know, we wanted to make a web series about martial artists. Yeah, I mean, the way that I play role-playing games is always a fight scene. That's one of my rules. Because it's kind of like, you know, the idea that a story is life with the boring parts taken out. Well, for me, it's everything is boring unless you're killing ninjas. Unless you're fighting ninjas, the whole life is boring. And so my life is terribly boring because I'm not fighting ninjas at the moment. That's
I guess my life isn't boring.
But for me, my movies are comic book movies and martial arts stuff. I'm very much that physical, not a violent person, but all about violence. Like I enjoy violence and the concept of it. And not I don't want to be construed concept of it, but like I just enjoy the tactics and and strategies and techniques and stuff. And so for me, role playing games, there's always violence somewhere. Even if the violence is kind of like that scene of Bruce Lee in Enter the Dragon on the boat, where he beats the guy verbally by saying, actually, there's probably a lot of people who haven't seen that movie. It's 40 years old. But
okay, everybody stop watching. Go watch that movie. I'm not joking. That movie is amazing. So stop right now and go watch it.
But he calls it fighting without fighting. And so basically he verbally, the guy wants to challenge him and fight on the boat, and he verbally gets him into a position of weakness to where he's just sitting behind the boat, strapped on a rope, helpless. And he's like fighting without fighting. So even if it's just a verbal argument, it's important. But for Jadepunk personally, especially with the martial arts, one of the things that I do is I study a lot of applications with martial arts. Like before we went broadcasting, I talked to you about Ian Abernethy, who lives up in Cumbria, and he takes kata and applies true applications, like real applications. It's not just blocking a guy over here and then turning and fighting someone over here. He explains what these are and why they matter and why they've lasted through the ages, and kata is important. And so one of the things that I believe in following Jeet Kune Do and the concepts is that it's okay if you create your own style. I mean, why would you not? If you're practicing martial arts and you're practicing a whole large amount, why would you not create your own? And so for me with game design, I've always been very much of, I don't care what the tradition is. I don't care how you always did it. I like this and I like that, and this works and that works, and I'll plug them together, but they don't work together, so I got to change something, but they're okay, now it works. And I'll do that. And for me, if a game system, if I'm running a game and it's just not working, okay, well, that part's not working, throw it out, let's make a new one. Let's replace that part. And so it's really been, my life is all about, this isn't working, let's change it. And that's how my mind works from Jeet Kune Do, is if something's not working or something could be better, let's make it better. Let's not be prideful and say, no, this is how we do it, this is tradition. Man, forget that. How would it be better, and let's just do that. And so that's how I've always created things. And when I teach Jeet Kune Do, it does not look like the Jeet Kune Do I was taught. It does not look like the Jeet Kune Do that JP, a friend of mine, teaches, because I bring my karate backgrounds and my judo and my tai chi and all these other things, and I mix them into it, and it's totally different. I teach kata with my Jeet Kune Do, most people don't. And so when like I teach my daughter, I call it now, it's less Jeet Kune Do, more like a family style, I guess. I don't have a name for it. I don't want to be that guy. But that's how I've put everything together. And so in doing like the martial supplements, a big part for me was creating the martial arts. And not just, and I know from experience and from study, a martial art is not just created in a vacuum. It's not like, hey, you know what, we think kicking would be cool, so Taekwondo, let's just make something with kicks. There's a reason why they use kicks. And there's also an environmental reason. They're on mountains. And so if you can get the high ground on somebody, you can kick them very easily. So now we need to really master how this kicking thing works. And since they're already mastering that, even when they're on flat ground, they want to master it. And then the reasons behind why they're doing it that way. And there's so much thought and history and everything that goes into it. So for creating a martial art, for like the martial arts supplements, I really get into what did the environment create? What did the social, political environment create? But also, what's the reason that these techniques are chosen? Why were these techniques chosen? What's the doctrine of the art? Because like most people think that karate is all about just fighting people with fists. They have a doctrine. It sees the opponent with a limb and pummel them to the head and neck. Everything in karate is built around that concept. And if you need to, break the limb as you grab it and then pummel them to the head or neck. But it's all about control your opponent while you bash them to those areas. Everything is built on that doctrine. And so creating the martial arts and the supplements and stuff, I had to do that. And it's a lot of technical mumbo jumbo that most people will probably like, everything I just said probably go over their head, and that's okay. But this is why, I mean, and I'm sure that this is why certain other games like Smallville get lost on me, is people are all about like, this is the drama, and this is how you build it, and this is how you do that thing. But for me, that's not fun storytelling. I love Smallville, but for me, it's about the build-up until something bounces off his chest or breaks on him or he punches someone through a wall. It's the build up until I see that. That's what I enjoy about Smallville, because I come from the comic books where Superman fights the whole issue. There's not so much the talking. And so it did influence me quite heavily with how I approach it and how I create it. And a lot of that, a lot of people are like, well, can you tell us how to create a martial art for the Jadepunk? And I'm like, well, I gave you a lot of examples, but if I go into how, I think it would be an entire supplement of its own, and you would probably be really bored unless you're a martial artist who enjoys that kind of thing. And I don't think we have that many followers who are.
Never underestimate a gamer's desire for minutia. All right. I'm just saying, maybe you could put something into it, like a rubric, into the intro of the martial art book when you're done.
Well, yeah, I'm doing it on a very game meta level. Like, you create the basic style. What is the basic thing? And then you have the mastery. What is the upgraded version of that basic thing? Like we in the Naramel supplement, which I have right here. Fortunately, it's right on my desktop. Otherwise, I would butcher this. But I have a martial art in there called Sagatire, and that is basically our version of Kenjutsu, which is a Japanese sword fight. And so when I was writing that, I said, okay, we have the basics of Sagatire. It's the Sagatire novice. And so I wrote a little blurb about what is a Sagatire novice, like what is the concept of this? And at this level of proficiency, the student has learned the basic strikes and how to position themselves to best execute them. Okay, cool. That's the concept. It's all about positional. And I was reading Musashi's book, Gorin no Sho, or the Book of Five Rings, and it's all about his tactics and fighting.
As I like to call it, the book of how to murder everyone always.
And so he was all very about position. So this is about position, and then it shows you the techniques that it gives. And then I go down and I create the master of Sagatire, and this master has perfected the deception tactics of striking from a position of advantage. So the beginner creates a position of advantage, and then the master is good at capitalizing on that. And then from there, I create two techniques, or well, I guess I only did one here. I thought I did two, but one or two aspects or assets rather of what are just some techniques, like really prominent techniques that go into this style. All of it is up to, like, this is a super detailed way of doing it, because you could just say, my character is a master of Sagatire, and he can do this, and you write it all up in one asset, and you're done. And that's a way you could do it. But I wanted to show everybody, and I will show everybody in the final book when we go over the Tournament of the Four Winds how to do this. But as far as creating your own martial art and the thought process that goes into that, I think I might skip that, because there's a lot that goes into there.
Okay, we've also talked about the scene fractal that's been used, and the other question that Ben sent me was, how come it took people so long to think of something like the scene fractal? Why didn't anyone else come up with it first?
I came up with it my first year of Fate, so I have no idea why it took everyone else so long.
Well, I think it's one of those things that everybody said they were going to do, but no one really did it, because until you do it, it's not done, And so it was one of those things where, like, yeah, you could do it as a scene fractal, but this works fine, and so everybody did it. Whereas at the time, Ryan was big into, hey, let's see how I can manipulate the system and see how far we can push it. And so he said, well, let's try this. And we all said, that's brilliant. So I think it was just basically he was the first because he was the first. Because other people have done similar things. As somebody who's been into Fate since 2007, I've been following along, and there have been similar things, but the actual adventure and even better, the scene fractal hadn't been done, and I think it was just that he was the first guy to think about doing it and actually do it.
Yeah, I'm all about, like I said, no planning, no GM prep. I hate GM prep. As a GM, I hate it. I'm always GMing. I hate prep, because once I know the story, it's the same way when I write fiction. If I know the story, I'm done with the story. I don't want to edit. I don't want to write it. If I do an outline, I'm screwed because I know the story, and for me, it's over. It's done. I've told the story.
Yeah.
So,
which is a big problem. We'll probably get to that when we talk about the iconic stories.
Eventually, when we get there. But you know, that's the thing with me is so for me, it was all about how can GMs not create an entire adventure in 20 minutes, but also not prep for more than 20 minutes. And that's where, you know, and then I started thinking about, well, everything in Fate can be made as a character, why not an adventure? And that's what led to it. And then I created the scene fractal because that made more sense. Because sometimes you might get an adventure. And like we do in the Vigilance Committee, we mention all the time at the end of a scene, if your players went off, here's some ideas for some scene fractals. If everyone went off on a tangent, here's some basically goals that you need to have before you go to the next scene. And so if they didn't get it here, create some scene fractals and get this goal. And I think that's a great way to create adventures. If you're going to do a big, long adventure, you have that in mind to write it like that. Come up with goals for the next scene. What do you have to enter the next scene? So if nobody met that goal, don't be afraid to end this scene. Go into a new one and come up with a new way to get that goal. And I think that's probably a stronger way than creating a whole adventure. But, again, I can't make it work. Everyone else can. So more power to them.
I think it's a testament to some of the things that you've put in JP. You talked about the faces system for creating NPCs. You're saying there's a lot of stuff in there that you guys think is the sort of main impressive things that you've added into the game that other people maybe don't draw as much attention as some of the other aspects of the game. I think it's probably a testament to the fact that they do seem such a logical fit to the game system that they almost do sort of get overlooked in a way, because there was a lot of sort of stuff when I read through the book I just sort of went, oh yeah, that makes sense. And you almost don't think, oh, someone's had to design that and had to go through creating that. It just sort of seemed, oh yeah, that's something I probably should have been doing. Right. So I think it's probably a testament to how well that sort of stuff did fit into the core system.
Everything I mentioned too is in the GM section, and most GMs, and I'm assuming with this statement because this is how I was for years, is most GMs, meaning me, skips a lot of the GM sections. I know how to GM. GMing games is the same every game, so yeah, no, I don't need to read that part. And I still don't think I've read the first 2 editions of Mutants and Masterminds on how to GM it, because I was like, no, I'm not a GM. I get past that. I read 3rd edition because I enjoyed the whole game, but yeah, I skip it, and that could be a thing that happened. Is a lot of Fate players were like, oh, GMing section, I know how to do that. I'll just look up for the bad guys and see what those look like and how to create them. Okay, I got it. I don't need any more. Because a lot of people said there's not a lot of asset examples in the game. A lot of people have told us that. And I'm like, well, you know, there's 5 or 6 in the asset section, but there's quite a few in the back of the book in the GM section. The bad guys, the minions have them. The major bad guys we wrote up have them. The characters in the very back of the book, the sample characters, they have them. If you look at the book overall, we have maybe 20. So I was like, that's not unlike the number of feats in D&D 5th edition. So maybe you didn't read the book. And now I'm not saying maybe they did, and I think there should be a lot of more assets in there just because, especially in the asset section. But they are spread about, and we did kind of think when we were writing it, we have assets in these other sections. Let's not bog down this area with examples. Let's let everyone see because we wanted everything to be seen at a glance quickly. The book was designed for when you're at the table, you don't want to have an hour to look through the book to find a rule, and if all there are examples, you have to filter through those. So let's just make it real easy to spot with your eye, here's the feature, here's that feature, here's this and that I need, and then move on. And that's what I had in mind, is when we show examples of characters later in the book, that's where the examples of the assets would be. And you bring out a point with that, you know, because those things in the GM section are not talked up about a lot, maybe that's why. Maybe people just aren't reading that section because they think they know how to GM. And I'm not going to call them arrogant for that, because I did it and I know about it. And I still do it when I pick up a new game. I'm like, oh, how to GM? Nah, I think I know. Unless the system is really awkward, like World Edition, or World Engine, then I might read through it. But yeah, I think there's maybe something to that. The section either gets glossed over, or, like you said, it fits. And I'm totally biased in saying those are the cool parts of the game, because we wrote them, and that's the brilliance of it. It's not brilliant. Maybe that's why too. So.
Well, I think one of the things that I find particularly striking about the asset system is, given that it's a fairly sort of general set of sort of positives and negatives, of these sort of merits and flaws you can assign to assets, is sort of seeing how much stuff you can actually create with it. I mean, I've done sort of a few blog posts where I was sort of going, oh right, okay, let's see what I can build with the asset system. All right, can I build a giant mecha suit of armor with it? Oh well, yeah, I can. That's fine. It makes me almost invincible. However, I've got to spend a scene powering it up, and then I've got to do all these various bits and pieces to actually get it working. And it'll only last for a scene, but for that scene, yes, I will have this giant mecha suit, all the way down to, as you say, like your Red Jade 6-shooter, your martial arts techniques. I've got a player in my game who said, I want to have tattoos on my back that are sort of like tattoos of eyes that make it more difficult to sort of surprise me. And I was like, yeah, you can do that. That takes a couple of minutes to work out. That's fine. So I think the flexibility is probably one of the main strengths of that part of the system, as far as I'm concerned.
Right. As we write fiction for characters and stuff, like I read Jake's story for the Iconic Adventures last night. He's doing a Jadepunk story, and he introduced a lot of really awesome Jade, like a Jade tattoo, functioning in fiction, and it was exactly how I imagined Jade tattoos functioning. And as we write the more fictional elements of it, we can start fleshing out those things and mechanics for the website. Examples like web enhancements of if you read that story, here are the main character write-ups for free. They're on the website, and here's how their assets are and how they work. And if you want to know the fiction behind them, well, read the story. And so I think as we go forward, like the Jade Tech books have tons of assets, the Marshall supplements, they have more assets, and as we go forward, and we
the thing that a lot of people don't think about is the Venture City, or not Venture City,
Vigilance Committee.
Vigilance Committee. Dang it, we got 2 VCs in Fate now. That's just terrible. Vigilance Committee has loads of really brilliant assets in it that I think, honestly, I think the second Vigilance Committee adventure is one of the best adventures I've ever read. And Ben took parts of the setting that I wrote, like the Shigato, the Death Guard. I wrote them up in like 2 sentences, and that's all I had because I thought it was a neat idea. And I was like, okay, good, done. And he wrote up this huge section, and now there's a really great piece of art of what they look like and their assets, what their assets look like, and it's just brilliant. And I'm like, okay, that's great. So again, if there are assets, because assets are so intrinsic to the system, almost everything we do is going to have them from here on out. It's just, the world is going to have loads of ally assets, loads of probably techniques as well that aren't martial arts, that are just, like, this is what people from here would have if they're special, if they've trained really hard in something. And so my big thing is, it's really hard when doing assets not to put a hard cap on how far you can go, because I want that to be, and I think Ryan agrees with me, I think we want that to be the limits of Jade Tech and the limits of techniques and the limits of allies and all of that really should be up to the table. Like, okay, yeah, your guy wants to have a cool eyes on the back of his shoulders kind of thing. That's neat. What if somebody wanted to have a best friend who's a dolphin? That he can talk to but nobody else can, or something like that, or a talking sky whale. Well, you could totally have that as an ally. I didn't put sky whales in the game, but, it kind of fits. And, if you want to put that there, that changes the world, but that's your world. It's once you bought the game, it's yours. Once we're done writing it, it is no longer our world, it's your world. And so we didn't want to put, I've run into this a lot where people say, well, what are the limits on Jade? And I say none. Even though there are limits, it's just the limits are up to what you guys at the table decide are the limits of assets, because I don't want to tell you what you can and can't do if you have a great idea. I don't want to crimp your style. I want to give you the tools to build something amazing.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because one of the things I've heard recently, I didn't hear it until recently, somebody mentioned that our Jade section, our Jade is not overly described in the book. It's on 2 pages, 1.5. It's not a lot on Jade itself as far as each color and what it does. And someone said, well, you're not doing that. And I said, well, first of all, there's Jade Tech, and we knew that was going to happen. And it covers, we have a whole book, like 16 pages, 20 pages, on one color of Jade, and a bunch of a dozen assets just for that color. And once we put that together, we will have a whole book on Jade. But the reason we did not go too far into it initially is Jade is your excuse. You come up with, I have this idea for a thing. Now I'm going to create that thing, and after I'm done with that, what colors of Jade, if any, because maybe not, what colors of Jade are required to make this thing a thing? So I create, I want to have a mechanical arm. Okay, well, because you need a power source, that's the only thing you need. You might have it be blue Jade and make it like a power source that's consistently going and never has to be recharged. Or you could do it with black Jade and have that excuse. But you want it to be, you want it to be invulnerable? Okay, well, green Jade. But you create the thing and then say what color of Jade. And so that way you just look at the colors of Jade. You see, well, green fortifies and strengthens. Well, okay, if this thing's strong and tough, it's going to have some green Jade. If the red Jade blows up, okay, well, then I want some red Jade in a gun or an engine or something like that. But so really the possibilities of the inventions would be the only limit. And I think we covered in just the steampunk concept, which that kind of covers the general limits of, you have airships and you have guns and you have martial arts weapons and things like that. And then we also have techniques and people. So there's kind of an implied technological limit, and then people and techniques is going to have an implied limit in what humans are capable of, or animals if your ally is an animal. But the Jade is narrative justification to create whatever awesome, abnormal, supernatural or super technological thing you have in mind. And really, for me at my table when I sit down, and I have only done it once now, and I think about it. But when I think about sitting down at a table, it's always think of a steampunk thing you want to create, but there's no steam tech. So instead, what colors of Jade create that? And I've never really had to, like when I did this last game recently, I didn't have to force that on people. They just kind of understood, oh, okay, well, I want this thing. And I think in that game we only have one Jade tech device at all. Everyone just has techniques and allies, and then they're going to create Jade tech in the game.
Well, to be fair, a quick side note to all you power gamers out there, allies are the way to break the game. You can completely break the game with allies. I did it for, I think, 2 refresh. I built Aquaman, and an army of sharks pretty much wins. And it doesn't require a whole lot of work. You can also break...
That makes sense.
It's just because you build it numerous. You grab bunches of numerous, and then you put a couple flaws on it to make it less problematic. So you only use it once or something like that, once per session. And then all of a sudden you've got 600 sharks who will back you up, and bam! Sure, you can only do it once, but you win. So anyone who wants to break the game, that's how you break the game. It's not hard.
And I think it's also important to note on that, most of what I did, because I was primarily the playtester of the asset system, I sat down and just created tons of assets after I got the draft back from Mike Olson. And most of the assets I created, I would say 99% were one refresh assets. Because I can almost represent everything in one refresh. And I think I was also stuck in the fate concept of one stunt worth. And so when I create now multiple refresh assets, they do get pretty powerful. But they also, I mean, if you spent the refresh, that is, everything about your character is about that. So, okay, I mean, you've invested in your character in that. If they're super flawed, well, then they have that instead. It's up to you how you envision that. But I imagined with the game, people would sink maybe 4 refresh into their assets and then have the 3 refresh left since there's 7 refresh. But that's a dial. If you're finding that there's too many powerful assets or overly powerful, make it 3 refresh and that's all you got, or 4 refresh, and then go off of that and have them create what's there. Or do a game where you don't create assets on the fly in the beginning when you create your characters. You just go into the game and you create assets on the fly with the asset creation system in the game. And then if you want to keep it around forever because you like it, spend a refresh instead of a fate point, and you're done. And that's a good way to just jump into Jadepunk, do the story process to create your aspects, distribute your professions, and then go. And then create what you want for your character's assets in the game with asset creation. And that also teaches you how to create assets, because you got to know that.
I'll say, for those people who may not be as familiar with the system to actually create assets that you've discovered or that you've come across in the game, what is the difference between creating an asset at the start as part of your character and sort of creating one that you come across in the game? Because I know there are a couple of differences there.
Well, you got to roll a die, and based on that die roll, you can get a boatload of flaws.
Yeah, really, it's because we don't want it to fail. Failing's pointless and it's boring. So really, it's who gets to choose the flaws, you or the GM. If the GM gets to choose them, naturally, it's not going to be ideal. But if you get to, because obviously, if the GM picks the flaws, you might think those flaws are crap. I don't want to keep this device around. I'm just going to use it for the scene, and it's going to be done. But if you get to pick the flaws, that might end up being a permanent asset that you spend a refresh on to keep. And really, that's it. You create. What you do is you create an advantage, like you do with Fate. Anything. You create an advantage, and that becomes the function or guiding aspect of the item or of the asset. And then you have to have narrative justification. That's important. From there, you just if you can stick with that. And I'm going to create something, but I don't want to spend a fate point, so I'm just going to create this aspect, and I created a Red Jade 6 shooter. I have an aspect, free invocation, or 2, and there we go. I'm done. I'm going to use that. Or you can say, I want this to be more powerful. I spend a fate point, and now I'm going to add some features to it, and then I roll to see who gets to pick the flaws. And so you can't fail. It's just who gets to pick the flaws, and if you roll really bad, you get more of the flaws than normally it would have. And the GM usually gets to pick all those. So that's real. I mean, there's no failing at it, and there's no time required. Because you can say, if you're a Tony Stark character, you can be like, you know what? I have my bat shark repellent. It's on my, I guess, Batman character. My bat shark repellent. It's on my thing. I invented it the scene before we came here because I knew we were coming over the ocean. Well, okay, we can retcon that, but you're going to spend a fate point to create it and all that kind of stuff. Make your roll to do it. You have narrative justification because you did spend the last scene in the Batcave, so okay. But if you did not spend the last scene in the Batcave, maybe there's not narrative justification to retcon that. But it's up to the table how loose you want to get with that. But yeah, I mean, we wanted to keep it real simple, just a smidge more complicated than a general create advantage. And there it is. And so you can start Jadepunk with no assets, and within the first game, create all your assets. Or do kind of how Fate Core suggests sometimes. Just jump into the game, and when you feel like you need a skill, write it in. And if you never need it, you never write it in. So that's a way that you can go with it.
Okay, so we've talked about the fact that you guys, Reroll Productions, have already released a number of supplements about the different colours of jade, vigilance committee, scenarios, etc. What other supplements do you have in mind for Jadepunk in the future?
Well, we've got Jadepunk, the core book, and we've got the playmat, which is a physical and a digital playmat. The physical playmat, it's dry erase, and it's on one side it's all Jadepunk, and it's got the map of Jadepunk and the faces and all that. On the other side, it's a generic Fate Core playmat. It's got a zone map, boosts, and advantage aspect system, scene aspects, spots, because we understand not everyone's going to play Jadepunk all the time. but you can still use your Fate Core, your Jadepunk playmat to play Fate Core. And it's got and we have a digital one when you buy it that way, and the digital one's available on GTRPG. So that way you can put it on like your backgrounds for Roll20 or Google Plus. The game that I played yesterday is Jake's got a little thing in the playmat there. The game I played yesterday has we have a digital one. I put it up on the game. So if you look at my YouTube channel, you see that. The physical playmats are limited edition because they're a lot to print, and they did not. It's been almost a year since I got them printed and shipped out to the Kickstarter backers, and we haven't sold out yet. And I only got like 250 printed. So unless we sell out like this month, I doubt we're going to print any more. The digital will always be available, but the print, they're kind of limited edition. We only have about maybe 100 left, maybe a little less. We're doing an inventory of that tomorrow. My wife was talking about this morning. We had a full playmats, but that's going to be done. That's going to be done. The physical is going to be gone. And then we got Jadetech, which Jake is writing exclusively. We've got Vigilance Committee, which is going to wrap up next month, and Benjamin Fian practically wrote it exclusively. I got him started, but that was it. And that's a full adventure that takes you to a full major milestone. So it's all the way to like a full end of a season, and then you can restart or carry on. We have some suggestions on how to carry on. We have ideas on where to go next, but it depends on how well that line sells if we're going to continue it or not. And it's called Jadepunk Tales. Vigilance Committee is the actual title. Jadepunk Tales is the name of that series. Then we've got the Marshall series, the Marshall expansions. That's going to be one for each major great nation, plus one for Cao City, which is where kind of all the martial arts have been in this melting pot and come together, and some unique martial arts, kind of like Jeet Kune Do, has been created. And it's also going, and it has kind of a running storyline because there's going to be the tournament of the 4 winds inside that. And then after we're done with those, we're going to write the World Book, which is just the working name for it right now. We don't know what we're going to call it. And that's going to be where we kind of take the Jadepunk Chapter 6, the chapter that goes over Cao City, and we just kind of expand that chapter. We just rewrite that chapter for each major area, each major continent of the world. And then after that, we have some other plans, but that fulfills the initial Kickstarter promises that we said we would do. So at that point, and then we're going to do a Cortex Plus edition and a World Engine edition. But at that point, the Kickstarter will be fulfilled and done, and then we'll be looking at what other supplements can we do. But right now, and for the last year, and for the next year, our goal is to have all of these Fate supplements done by the end of 2015. And so at that point, we will look at the future, but right now we're focused on how can we get what we promised through the Kickstarter out there. And so that's what this all is. But yeah, that's what's going to be, and then we'll have, I know we have in mind some stuff for the religions, because our societies. I would like to do one on just airships, like an airship design guide, and have just a bunch of airships in there. That would be really cool, I think. But
we could get like really cool pictures and cutaways of the airships. I think that would be spooky.
Yeah, and
like
do
the beginning of the Voyage to the Treader, where they've got the sideways cutaway and you can see all the stuff.
Yeah, I would like to like our general vehicles, and how to do all the vehicles that are on the ground, in the air, in the water. Just do it all in one big book. That would be pretty cool. But yeah, I'm focused on Jadepunk. I love Jadepunk, and we're gonna do, as we move forward. The gaming line is slowly it's not slowing down. We're just finding the stride that we can maintain, which did require it to slow down. But now we can maintain this, and so we're gonna start doing more in the fiction side of things. And we're still gonna keep the gaming going on, but we're gonna focus a lot on the fiction too, and try to build that side of it so people who are not fans of gaming can become fans of Jadepunk, because I think the setting itself is compelling, even if you're not playing a game.
That handily moves on to the next question, which Arlene Medder sent me, where she was asking whether you plan to do setting books for the major nationalities and sort of government powers, which you sort of hinted at you're going to do in the World Book. Would that also cover the minor sort of nations, the lesser nations?
Well, how we're currently looking at doing it, if you don't mind me answering, Ryan, because
Go for it. Go for it.
I love world building. It's my favorite thing in the world. And so the way we've been looking at doing it is we're going to do one book or one little book, well, probably a little bit bigger than our normal little books, but one little book, about 25, 30 pages at most, about each of the 4 nations, and then about the nations that surround them. So when we get into the Caillou section, they have a city at the base of the river. I can't remember, but anyway, they have a city at the base of the river that the Almac civilization is on. They're the main point of contact with the Almac, and so there'll be a description of the Almac that's deeper and more, but it'll be from the Caillou's perspective, in the sense of like they're going to be wrong about a lot of stuff, because we want to get into that kind of the idea of the bad parts of colonialism, because again there has to be something you can fight. Something, even if you're a Caillou, if you're playing a Caillou, you can sit there in basically this kind of Caillou New Orleans, I guess, and say, hey, what we're doing here is wrong. We're taking advantage when we shouldn't. Or if you want to, you can also do an Age of Exploration kind of a H. Rider Haggard kind of a story too, where you go into the dark continent if you want. Again, we're not trying to cut out any kinds of stories, but we're trying to focus them on the bad. And then the Nehuat of the Kahuak people are in the middle of a war with the Aram, and so the Irish. And that'll be a lot like, again, that'll be a frontier. The Irish have frontiers everywhere, because they're also in the middle of a big frontier war with the Scrain. And so the Scrain will be described fairly strongly because they live in the burned lands, where basically the Aram never went until they discovered red jade there, and then they're like, oh, we need to take this. And so that's kind of how we're doing it, is we're saying, okay, how do these nations interact with the world around them in their immediate vicinity? And we want to leave that kind of nebulous in the sense of where exactly on the periphery of these nations they are and how big these other nations are. Like the Almac are all up and down the river, but how far out they go, who knows? Make them as big or as little as you want, depending on the needs of your story. But here's the basics of how outsiders view them. And we'll get into the Kushmet and the Nadasan and the Nodla and all of that, and we'll expand on them because they're on the edges and they're important. They have story hooks there already kind of built in.
Yeah, and one of the I had a thought. Sorry, I had a thought and it was gone.
Okay, yeah, and so each of them is going to be a description of kind of the world that they live in. Like Tuyang is incredibly dangerous. They live. I always laugh when I look at how people describe the nations we gave, because again that was part of what we had to cut. Because they say, well, the Irish, they're basically English, and it's like, well, yeah, sort of. They're English, Irish, German, and a little bit Incan Empire. So they're really weird. And Tuyang, well, it's kind of like China in the Song Dynasty, except they're really weird because their environment is so strange, because there's so much green jade in their environment. They have massive animals roaming the countryside that literally, even with jade tech, they can't always hold them off. Actually, in Blue Jade, which I wrote and I think Jesse's working on right now, right?
Yeah, we I'm waiting on a piece of art from Nicole, and then that might be only a week away.
So yeah, Blue Jade, we've got Frost Wolves, which are basically a combination of Blue Jade, wolf packs, and army ants. They're terrifying, and they're like the scariest thing I've ever come up with, and I think they're great. And it kind of gives you an example, even in a little bit, of the kind of world the Tuyang live in. They're not like we think they are, based on that, 3 paragraphs we gave you. It's deeper than that, because they live in they're affected by their environment. They're affected by the world around them, and they affect it as well. And so their culture is similar but very different in a couple of key ways. And the Kaiju, I think, are the biggest blend, really, because they're like Koreans and Japanese and Filipinos and bits of Polynesians that I stuck in, and Vikings, all stuck together. They're basically every boat culture ever.
And the important thing for us to do to get into this is we want to create more detail into these things because we want people to know more about them, but at the same time, we want to keep everything loose like Kaosao City is and like the map is. And so our challenge is tell more detail without controlling the settings. Still keep a lot of white space so that people can say, well, you know what, that's a little bit different than I imagined for the Kayumi, and I like more ninja. Kayumi have ninjas, but more ninjas. And so, you know, however, they have that space to plug that in, and we want to give that to them. But also, like with the Martial supplements are detailing some of this, like the Naramel, when we wrote them up, they have the more, you know, kind of like samurai culture. Like our version of samurai were in the desert in like a more mid-eastern kind of environment.
Feta Yumi, right? Or the Feta, I can never pronounce the word.
It's Fedaya, and I actually, my stepfather's Iranian and speaks Farsi, so I called him with a bunch of, what does this word and that word mean, and then I kind of mixed them together, and then I kind of jumbled them up again. So they're based on real Arabic and Farsi, but I changed them so that they actually don't fully represent that. But they're based on that. I took them from real words and then jumbled real words. But yeah, we're gonna detail. But if you look at like the Naramel Martial supplement, I went into the basically the war history of the Naramel, but I left things so vague that you can plug in. I mean, I think I may have mentioned one actual battle, but I mentioned tons of wars. You can plug in all kinds of battles and wars and personalities. I mentioned a couple personalities that were involved in these ancient wars, but not everybody. And so and not exactly what happened to these people. You can make that up how you want. And so you can go in and have fun with that. And that's our challenge, is to tell you about these people, but not how they died, not everything they did, not everything that's going on in this area, but just that these things have gone on, but that's not all that's happened. And so you can, like when we did the Kaosao City, I did the history of it. I wrote up the timeline. I left tons of spaces between the years, because if you guys want to go and play in between somewhere, in one timeline earlier on, go for it. There's a 5-year block here, a 15-year block there, whatever. I left space. I didn't want to say every single year. That would still give you space to play, but not quite as much. And one of the things I like about like Star Wars lore is I kind of hate it and like it. They have 20,000 years of history. Technology has not changed in 20,000 years, but they have these 4,000-year blocks where I can do anything I want. I can have a whole culture raise up, exist for and establish all kinds of stuff, and then die, and it changes nothing. So I enjoy it, but also I think it's really ridiculous. But I wanted to have that in the timelines. So the vagueness is our challenge going forward, is not flesh out the setting too much, and that's why I mentioned earlier that our fictions are more like an expanded universe kind of idea, and might influence our design decisions in the future.
Like an Elseworlds in DC, where it's like, this is what this looked like if this happened. Maybe it happened.
Yeah, the game is Jadepunk 616. Everything else is different numbered worlds, and we can go with the Marvel idea, and they're what ifs and such. But that's how we're going to approach the fiction. The fiction itself will happen in the same world, most likely, but it's going to be separate from the game so that the game can be yours.
Okay, so in addition to Jadepunk, which is obviously Reroll's main seller at the minute, there's also mention of Serial Tales, which is a Patreon-funded series of short fiction on your website. Now, obviously, I'm going to put a link to your Patreon account in the description of this video, so anyone who's interested in that can look into that further and contributing to that. For the audience, could you give us a short explanation of what that's about and how that Patreon process is going to work for people who aren't familiar with it?
Let me let Jake do that, because Jake has taken the reins on that one.
Well, Serial Tales is it's pulp. It's pulp stories like like Ryan and I love reading. It's serialized stories. So the goal is to tell a big story, sort of like John Carter of Mars or Sherlock Holmes or something. Tell a big story, but tell it in chunks, and that each chunk, hopefully, it will be interesting in and of itself as a story, and so it'll build, and then we can then combine them and re-edit them. Currently, we started it in October with the plan of at the end of November releasing the first issue. Ryan and I both got absolutely terrified writing the story for that, and so we tweaked and muddled and futzed with our stories for another month and a half. But now we're done. We're done. My story is currently in editing with Allison, because Allison is the best editor in the world. Seriously. Yeah. Allison Howard, seriously, freelance editor. Buy her up because she is worth the money.
Not too much. We need her time, and she also works with Grapple Gun Publishing, and they're great guys.
Make this look like we know what we're talking about. When you read our stuff and it looks it looks good, that was her. When the text is really awkward, that was us. But yeah, she's currently editing. Actually, currently editing my story right this moment. And then she's going to move on to Ryan's story, Kinetic, which is pretty good. And the stories we have currently for this issue are Chapter 1 of Dark Premonitions, which is about a Caillou princess named, she's Princess Lakau Kahi. And Kahi is pretty cool. She's going to go on a big adventure. Her whole world's going to fall apart. She's going to learn things, and in the end, it's going to start a major war, which will or will not exist, depending on how you want to use it in Jadepunk. But it is set in the world of Jadepunk, and it's going to kind of travel across the breadth of it, and kind of just allow me to play with the setting a bit more in a way I can't do with the big stuff. And then Ryan's story is Kinetic, which is a super story, kind of from what I've read, a coming of age kind of a story, sort of a thing. And it's pretty good. I'm not all the way through it yet. I started reading it last night, and then passed out at 2 in the morning because I don't know how to regulate my sleep.
I went way too long. It's supposed to be 2,000-word installments. This one is currently at 4,800 words because I couldn't introduce the characters in time. There's a lot of characters, a lot of subplots, and a lot of things that are going to go on. And I wanted to showcase here's the characters in their normal lives. And so it took too long. But it's not uncommon for comic books, and it's a superhero story. So I'm just calling it the double-sized first issue, and we could just go with that.
And yeah, and so then the Patreon works like this. The more money we get, the more artists we're going to be able to bring in to write for us. And then if we get to a certain point, we're going to be able to bring in Jesse Feehan. He's the guy who did the layout for Jadepunk.
Ferguson.
Ferguson. Ben Feehan. Jesse Ferguson. I'm sorry. I'm sure they will remind me of this as we go forward. Especially Jesse, because that was just awkward. Anyway, Jesse Ferguson will do the layout. He's the guy who did layout for Jadepunk, and he'll be able to do layout for the issues, and it'll be great. And then we'll also be able to get cover art done and all of that. But currently, we're at 2 stories an issue. If we go forward, if we get more people, and if people like it, so fingers crossed people like it, we'll be able to bring in a bunch more. And Ryan has a bunch of people who have asked him if they can do it, and we've looked over some of their stuff. It looks good, and so I think it's going to be good. We're trying to do something. We're trying to do a pulp magazine, you know, like a fiction magazine where people can get that serialized story they've always wanted and never got, and or where artists can get a start, you know, and say, okay, and they can get money for writing a story, and they still own it because that's part of it too. They're going to own their story. We don't buy the story. We're just buying the use of the story for our magazine, and that's it. And then they do what they want at. Right, Ryan? I'm not crazy when I say that, right?
No, that's exactly. We're going to get paid off of the sales that we make on because we're going to put it together. The story that they make for us, we're going to put together in a book, and so that we're going to have the rights to be first publishers on that. But then after that, you know, we'll have a time limit, and then the rights will pass to them, and they can then publish the book how they want. But we are going to, like, when the story's finished, we're going to put them together in a book, novella, novel, whatever the length is, put it on Kindle and everywhere else books are sold, and put it on print them out if you know, send them out that way. And there's options in the Patreon to be able to receive all of the print editions and all the different things that we're doing with it. And but yeah, the way we're doing publishing rights is we're going to have first publishing rights to publish it in our little books as a serial, and then we're going to have the ability to put them together and publish it as a print and ebook for 1 year. And then after that, rights revert back to that person. We take it down off of our store and give it to them, and they can do whatever they want with it. Or they can continue to keep it with us. The publishing, they get a percentage, so, you know, they could continue to let us publish it and get their percentage, and then move on, do whatever they want. You know, we're real easy to work with. I don't micromanage.
Our goal is to be real easy to work with.
That's our goal. Yeah, maybe it's not always the case. But I do want Reroll Productions to be a place where people get their start. One of the nice things about Jadepunk is, except for Mike Olson, everyone on the project is brand new to the industry. No one has worked in the industry yet before that. And even like Benjamin Feehan, when he comes on, and I like giving people their starts, because the only reason I'm doing this is I wanted to write comic books, and Marvel closed their doors. And then novels, they wouldn't let me sell those to people. I mean, getting an agent takes so long and so hard. So I want to be an open door, and I want people to be able to come to us and say, I've got this idea for a game, or, you know what, I'm just a writer, and I want to write on a game, and here's my chops, or I'm an artist, or whatever. And I've never worked on it. No one will take me, and I want to see. I'm good. I mean, you got to be good. But if you're good and you want to work and you just don't know how, give us a call. If I've got a spot on one of our teams, I'll plug you in. If I don't have a spot, the next time one opens, I'll help you out. But I do want to be that place where we get people started, kind of like Image Comics, how they were created. They were getting not a good deal from Marvel and DC and everyone else, so they came together and they made their own place where they owned everything, and they gave a percentage back to Image. And I want to be that for role-playing games and for fiction in general. I want to do more than just games. In fact,
our eventual goal is, I mean, because yeah, Serial Tales is just it's phase 2 of our, honestly, I think 4 or 5 phase plan.
For the world.
Because, well, no, so much as this, we want to get to be able to do all the things we wanted to do. Because Ryan and I, when we first started talking, when we first started getting together as a partnership, we said, what are the things we want to do? Because we know we want to do Jadepunk because it's cool, and so we did that. And then we're like, well, what do we want to do with this? And he's like, well, I want to do a short film. I want to do maybe even a movie series if we can get to it, set in Jadepunk, because Jadepunk really calls for a movie. If ever there was a setting that calls for a movie, Jadepunk is that setting. I mean, just imagine all the cool, bright colors flying around, slamming into each other. It's just going to be great. But,
an animated movie done by Blur Studios, just like the beginnings of all the video games, a whole-length movie like that. That's exactly what I want.
And so we want to do that, and we want to do comic books, because both he and I absolutely love the medium of comic books, what kind of stories you can tell with it. We grew up reading them, and so that's on our list as well. And again, I want to say this is phase 2, because phase 1 was role-playing games, and we've got that going. Ryan, you've got the next project, Shadowcraft is coming out. It's going to be awesome. And then after that is the Zhang Hu, which is going to be amazing. That's the card game. And so that's phase 2, the game, or phase 1 of the game systems. We've got that. We've got the cycle moving there, and so now we're moving on to the cycle of phase 2. And honestly, we've just been really lucky. I think is where we're at. It's just like Jadepunk did really well. We sold what, like 2,000 copies ish.
You know what? I've been doing taxes this year or this week because it's that season, and we sold a lot. I've been printing out counts, but I don't have them all.
That's okay. Yeah, I was just kind of keeping a track in my head, kind of keeping count. And so we've sold over 1,000, I think, definitely.
Much more than 1,000.
Yeah, which is quite a lot for a first product, or so I've been told by people. So we did really well, and we continue to do okay, and that's due to our fans mostly getting the word out and letting people know and playing our games. Playing our games really sells the most, I think.
Yeah, because I'm terrible at marketing.
Yeah, well, and I'm worse. So, but yeah, the thing is we've been really lucky, and we want to keep pushing forward while that luck holds, so that eventually, actually, Ryan and I's goal is basically just to eventually be able to do this for a living and not have to do other stuff.
This and fight ninjas.
Well, that's a given. That's a given.
I assumed the proposed movie would also feature a large amount of ninjas.
There would be ninjas, yes. I think both Ryan and I have scripts already written for potential movies for Jadepunk. So.
Okay, now for pretty much our final question, I've got a feeling I know what the answer to this will be, given how incredibly busy the two of you are with everything that's going on with Reroll Productions. I was going to ask, are you still doing work on solo projects or anything outside Reroll Productions that you want to plug?
For me, everything's Reroll. Because I'm...
Yeah.
Yeah, everything's Reroll for me. Like, everything I have planned, there's another Reroll project, you know. And with how we've been doing the teams, like Shadowcraft goes to Kickstarter in a couple of weeks, and so with how we've been doing the teams and hooking them up, I've kind of become, and I really, really like this because this is perfect for me, is I'm kind of like the idea guy. I come up with the core concept of what the thing's going to be, and then I work with the team to flesh that out, and then once we have something we're happy with, go for it, and they take it and they run with it. So, you know, everything that I'm doing is kind of for Reroll Productions. And like I said, I'm interested in publishing other people's stuff if they have a product that I can get behind, and I think my fan base will. And so, you know, Jake, all our fan base is pretty much evenly divided between us. They're fans of both of us. So, you know, Jake has some stuff that he's pretty much writing on his solo. And later in the year, either later in the year or 2016, depending on how it all comes out, some of that will be published.
Yeah. I've got 3 projects I'm kind of working on my own, just for me, and then I've got one I'm working on kind of with Christopher. And I guess I'll talk about them now. Why not? And that I plan on releasing them through Reroll if everybody thinks they work. If they don't, then we'll rework them because that's just the way we roll at Reroll. But I've got a project that's currently called Heartbreaker, where I'm taking again the tropes of Tolkien and Moorcock and Robert E. Howard, and taking basically the core of modern fantasy and saying, okay, what are the things about this that work? What are the things about this that work as a game as opposed to a story? And so I'm taking, for Heartbreaker, I've got something like 40,000 words written on various systems to work fate into something that's cohesive still, while still allowing you to do those kind of fantasy tropes where you travel and you do these things, and where magic has a very specific feel. And while I did that, I ended up writing a setting for it as well, because again, I can't help but write setting. It never stops. And so I've been working on that, and like I said, I got about 40,000 words on that. And my main problem is I don't have the first 10,000 words, which are the part that describe everything. I have all the nitty-gritty. I just don't have the overarching thing. So I'm trying to figure that out right now. And then I'm working on Blue Collar Necromancy, which was a blog post I did a long while back. which is about necromancy for hire, basically. What if necromancy was like plumbing, or something everybody needed but nobody wanted to do? And so it's a little bit Ghostbusters, and it's a little bit this setting a friend of mine, Alex, and I came up with a long time ago, but carried forward. And I started getting really loopy with it because, okay, to explain how I always build worlds, I started saying, well, okay, what kind of a world would there need to be in order for magic to be open like this? And I was like, well, there couldn't be Christianity as an overarching thing, because that cut down on that sort of thing just historically, because I study history, and this is just one of those things you know. And so I'm like, well, okay, so what if Alexander of Macedon never really stopped? Then Rome wouldn't have come up, and we would have had an Alexandrian legacy. And so then I was like, okay, what happens then? And I'm like, well, okay, I could rewrite English, because English is Germanic-based, with Celtic influence, and then I could just add in where all the Latin words are. I could add in Greek words instead. And then I was like, but then I would write a text that wouldn't make any sense to anybody but me, because I'd basically be writing a new language. And then I realized I'd gone way down the rabbit hole. So that's kind of what I do. That's where my head goes instantly. I'm like, hey, I could just do Greek. And then I'm like, why am I stupid? But basically the premise is demigods exist, like the Greek demigods exist, and or at least the lines of them, because all the gods died at around the same time Jesus would have died. So you still got the BCE, CE divide, that you would normally get, but instead it's just when the gods died. And you can actually go to the Middle East and look at the corpses of the gods, because they're there. So it's this really, really weird world, and I'm not certain how to do it in a way that will make sense to people. Where basically you have these lineages of magic, and then necromancy is magic of the people. It's black magic in the sense of nobody wants to do it because it's low magic, it's ugly magic. But it needs to be done. It basically puts ghosts to rest and that sort of thing. And the equivalent of World War I happened, and thousands of ghosts came up, and nobody could deal with it, and it's a big problem, and that's where the setting starts. So it's kind of set in a Dust Bowl type era, set in a Great Depression kind of era, but with magic. And so I might just end up doing the Great Depression with magic, because why not? And then the one I'm working on with Christopher is kind of a supernatural detective romance kind of story, where it's set in a world where, again, magic is acknowledged, but it's generally viewed with fear. But you can still make a living at it, and so I'm taking bits of blue-collar necromancy and putting it into it, and Christopher's got a lot of really great ideas too, and so we're putting together something that's, again, it's still currently in the brainstorming stage there, but it's going to be pretty fantastic when we're done. We've got a couple of really cool mechanics that are coming out for it, and then the last one I'm working on is I'm almost done with it, or at least done with the basic thing, is Where the Antelope Play, which is my take on it's my old school Revolution. Everybody talks about the OSR and how they're trying to do the original games. I'm like, no, I'm trying to do the games that I was brought up in. I'm trying to do Palladium, West End, World of Darkness, AD&D. The games I was brought up in that I played, and then I was like, I want to get a game that does that. And so Where the Antelope Play is my take on it. Basically, think Masters of the Universe as described by Hunter S. Thompson. And that's kind of where I'm at. So those are the projects I'm kind of working on just in my spare time when I'm not working on Jadepunk, which is very rare these days.
Now, you've mentioned, Ryan, you've mentioned Shadowcraft a couple of times. Is there anything you can tell us about that?
Yeah, it's a fantasy setting, and it's going to be Fate, but we're taking Christopher Ruthenbeck is in charge of the Fate part of it, or the Fate part of it, the mechanics. And we were brainstorming the other day, and he's taking Fate to a brand new level as far as how conflicts are done and everything, really changing it. But for the better, and not for the just to change it, but because it works for the setting. And basically what the setting is it's heavily influenced by fairy and fae, and so there's a lot of the idea is that the core race was stolen or kidnapped from their location, wherever it was, and they were raised in Arcadia, this reach run, this section of the world where they were basically slaves of the fae. And they were bred, and the magic was cast on them to make them the perfect slave for whatever it is they were doing. And they kind of had 3 castes of these slaves, or 3 types. And eventually, they because they were bred with fae magic, they became able to kind of produce it. And so they're kind of these half fae kind of creatures. And they eventually overthrow their fae captors and become the rulers of this land, and branch out and spread out over this land. And one goes too far and finds something dark and becomes dark, and there becomes a war amongst these half fae. And the lineages of the half fae is what we call the races or species. We avoid that whole argument, and they're lineages of the same race because they were altered. And so they all learn how to. Magic is called expression, because for them it's not magic. It's not strange or fictional or weird. It's just they can express supernatural abilities, and so we're kind of in the way that the history works out right now in the setting. It's a Cold War era, and so it's kind of, if you mixed the idea, and I had the idea from watching Mission Impossible: Ghost Protocol, and it was kind of the concept of, if you took Mission Impossible, the movies, and made them in a fantasy world, what would that look like? And that's what this is. So your agents working for the king, and you get scrolls that will self-destruct and burn in 30 seconds. So you read what your mission is. You get a team together, and you go do that mission behind enemy lines, whatever that mission happens to be. And the opposition, they have their own agents, and so it's a Cold War. And that's kind of where, and so all the agents are called shadows, because they kind of. They're not. If any side openly warfares, then the war is going to break out, and no one wants that. So they're shadows that move through both empires, kind of just doing their jobs. And because it's a spycraft kind of thing, it's Shadowcraft is the name. And so it's very much kind of like a James Bond Mission Impossible in a fantasy world full of no Tolkien races. It's all half fae kind of lineages. You have one that's kind of really half fae, kind of like humans with fae abilities. And then you have the Sylvans, which they almost appear like elves, but they're kind of like shifters. If they express too much magic, they turn animalistic. And while they're expressing, they turn animalistic. If the more humanoid ones do express too much, they become ephemeral and almost ceasing to exist, like transferring between worlds. And then the Stonekin were created to be big laborers and such, and so when they express, they literally turn stone, and if they express too much, they will kill themselves and just turn into statues. And so you have these lineages of half fae that you take over as your characters, and you portray agents, shadow agents in this Cold War, with all kinds of missions that aren't just go around murder hoboing. It's actually, you have a reason. This one, if Jadepunk was all about doing good for the sake of doing good and being heroes, Shadowcraft is about basically forgotten country, that kind of idea. You're going to go for the sake of your country and sacrifice everything, and be willing to have your name erased from all records and be looked down upon by your own countrymen for doing what the country needed. So it's kind of the Batman of the fantasy settings. And so that's what Shadowcraft is going to be about.
And is that going to be released on Kickstarter, or?
Yeah, it's going to go to Kickstarter. I'm hoping in 2 weeks. I've got to get the video done, and then we've got a professional video editor who's going to put that together and make the video look better than I did on my iPhone for Jadepunk. And so he's gonna put that together, and we're waiting for some art. We're going to with a cool kind of Guild Wars 2 art style, where there's lots of abstract elements, and the idea is the edges of creation are not finished. The edges of perception have not been finished by the gods, and so it's kind of like it gives that real Fey kind of feel. And so I'm waiting on some visual elements in the video, and then we're going to go. Setting-wise, we're ready. And mechanically, we need to do some play testing. Right now, Christopher Ruthenbeck is he's working on finishing up kind of the, I guess, rough mechanics that we can take and play test. But we're going to go to Kickstarter regardless, because even if the mechanics don't work out, we can go straight Fate core with this. So, you know, but because of how expression works, it kind of has a contest, heavy emphasis on the contest mechanic, and there's a lots of succeeding at cost. Even if you succeed, there's a cost. So there's a lot of the Fate concepts ingrained in the setting, and that's going to be no matter what, we'll be able to do it. So, but we're going to go to Kickstarter with that in a couple of weeks, start getting that funded so I can start paying people and getting things rolling out.
Excellent. Well, I shall look forward to seeing that. And all that it remains for me to do is to thank you guys. Thanks very much for agreeing to speak to us and talk about Jadepunk, Reroll Productions, and what you enjoy in this great hobby of ours. Thanks very much for taking the time to talk to us, guys. To anyone who's watching this in the future, we'll put all the links that we've talked about in the video description below. And we hope you've enjoyed the video and found it informative. So thank you very much again, guys, for talking to us.
Thanks for having us.
No problem at all. And I will end the broadcast there. Thanks again, guys.